Story 1. Buckle up. This is going to be long, disgusting, and honestly, reads like a soap opera script, just without the commercials for pads. This story involves me, Mark, a structural engineer, working for a large firm in Austin, Texas, my ex-wife, Lauren, 32, a stay-at-home wife who called herself a freelance interior designer, but had at most 3 commissions in 2 years, her lover, Kyle, 38, owner of a construction company, my former business partner, and the man I considered an older brother, and my sister, Kate, 30, a divorce attorney who, by the way, saved my life, but nearly ruined my reputation in the process. Lauren and I met in our junior year of college. I was studying engineering, she was in marketing. She was one of those girls who wear oversized sweaters, drink pumpkin spice lattes, and actually listen. Back then, I was a skinny guy with acne and insecurities from growing up without a father. Lauren became my anchor. We got married 2 years after graduation. The wedding was modest, paid for by my mother's parents. I vowed to give her everything she wanted. And I did. By 30, I had climbed to senior engineer at Holt Industries. The salary was high, and I started taking side contracts. That's when I decided to start my own small construction company. But I couldn't run the business alone. I needed someone who understood operations, people management, and sales. That's where Kyle came in. We met on a job site. Kyle was a finishing contractor. A big guy, always smiling, slapping me on the back, saying, "Mark, dude, you're a genius at calculations, but you're a zero at negotiations. Let's join forces." We formed MK Construct LLC, Mark and Kyle. We invested equally. I put in the money, he brought connections and equipment. The first 2 years, we worked like dogs. I brought in the projects, he ensured they got done. In 2020, we landed a contract to build a residential complex. It was our golden ticket. Meanwhile, Lauren stayed home. We didn't have kids because she wasn't ready. I didn't push it. She got into yoga, mindful consumption, and expensive restaurants. I thought she deserved it. I worked 14-hour days, slept in a trailer on the construction site, while she posted Instagram stories with glasses of rosé on our patio. Kyle was a frequent guest at our house. We lived 15 minutes apart. He'd come over with a bottle of whiskey, and we'd discuss deals. Lauren always poured his coffee, laughed at his jokes. I thought, how great is it that we're friends as families? At the time, Kyle had a girlfriend, Michelle, who constantly complained that he was always working. They broke up a year and a half after our partnership began. Like an idiot, I felt sorry for him. I told Lauren, poor Kyle, he's all alone now. We should have him over for dinner more often. And we did. He'd show up at 7 p.m., we'd have dinner, then I'd retreat to my office to close out estimates, leaving them in the living room to watch some series. I'd hear their laughter through the walls and felt glad Lauren wasn't bored. Everything started going downhill in early 2023. Lauren grew cold. Where she used to greet me with dinner, now she'd be on her phone, not even looking up. Sex disappeared. It wasn't just infrequent, she started turning away, saying she was tired. I chalked it up to stress. The residential complex was behind schedule, and I was coming home angry and dirty. The first red flag was the passcode on her phone. We used to have each other's fingerprints saved. One day, I asked to use her phone to order pizza because mine was dead, and she clutched it like a tick. She said, "I'll order it for you." I wrote it off as typical female quirkiness. The second thing was the business trips. Lauren announced she wanted to revive her design career. She said she was going to Dallas for a week to see a potential client. I was thrilled. I gave her money for the hotel. She came back with a couple of new pairs of shoes and was unusually cheerful. Problems also started in the business. Kyle began acting strangely. He started questioning my decisions in front of subcontractors, countermanding my orders. When I confronted him in the office, he said, "Mark, you're too cautious. You're holding back growth. People are tired of your micromanagement." I thought it was just a partner crisis. I suggested hiring a business coach. He agreed, but the coach never got hired. The climax came in March 2023. We were finishing a duplex in a prestigious neighborhood. The client was happy, and we received the final payment. I suggested we celebrate at a restaurant. Kyle said he had a date. Lauren said she had a migraine. I headed home with champagne and flowers. The house was dark. I went upstairs, the bed was empty. I called Lauren. She said, "I went to my mom's, she's not feeling well." I called her mother back. My mother-in-law said, "Mark, dear, we're having dinner in town, everything's fine, say hi to Lauren." My heart dropped. I got in my car and drove toward the office, just to clear my head. Our office was in an industrial zone, with a small warehouse attached. When I pulled up, I saw Kyle's black pickup. It wasn't in our lot, it was behind the building, in a dead end. Next to it was her white Audi. I'm not a psycho. I didn't break the door down. I sat in my car, took out my phone, and started recording through the windshield. I sat there for 40 minutes. At 11 p.m., the warehouse door opened. Kyle came out first, adjusting his belt. A minute later, Lauren came out, fixing her hair. They didn't even look around. She got in her car and drove off. He got in his. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stared at the video I'd just taken. At that moment, something clicked in me. I don't know how to describe it. It wasn't grief. It was a cold, mathematical understanding that my life had just split into before and after. I didn't go home that night. I went to my sister's. Kate lives 20 minutes away from me. She's a family law attorney, and if you ever want to get divorced with minimal losses, you go to her. She's small, red-haired, with a bulldog's personality. I knocked on her door at 11:30 p.m. She opened it in her pajamas, saw my face, and said, "Come in." "Coffee or whiskey?" I showed her the video. She watched it 3 times without looking away. "Mark," she said, "you need to make a decision right now that will define your life. If you go into that house and cause a scene, she'll start lying, hiding evidence, and paint you as the aggressor. If you want to come out of this clean, you will keep your mouth shut until I tell you otherwise." "I want them to pay," I said. "Good. Then starting tomorrow, you become the calmest, happiest husband on earth. You smile. You ask no questions. You hand over the credit cards." And I start digging. I got home at 1 a.m. Lauren was already in bed. She said, "Mom's feeling better." "I'm so tired." I kissed her on the cheek. "Glad everything's okay, babe. I've never acted better in my life." The next 3 months were hell on earth, pretending. I gathered evidence. Kate hired a private investigator, a former client of hers who did this part-time. A guy named Dan. He turned out to be a genius. By the end of April, I had a 200-page folder. It turned out Lauren and Kyle hadn't been seeing each other for 3 months. They'd been together for a year and a half. Since September 2021. They'd gone to Dallas together. That business trip was a romantic weekend. They'd rented a studio downtown for $2,500 a month, paid for with our company's corporate card. Yes, you read that right. My own money, which we earned together, was paying for my wife's love nest. But that was just the beginning. Dan uncovered financial fraud. Kyle, as operating director, had been signing off on work completion certificates with fake subcontractors. MK Construct was paying a non-existent firm called K&S Logistics for services never rendered. K&S Logistics was registered to a strawman, Kyle's cousin. Over 2 years, he'd siphoned about $180,000 out of our joint business. I sat there staring at the numbers, feeling nauseous. I'd brought a man into my home who was fucking my wife in my warehouse, using my equipment, and stealing from my pocket. When I showed the data to Kate, she whistled. "Mark, this is no longer just an irreconcilable differences divorce. This is commercial fraud and embezzlement. But here's the catch. If you go to the police now, they'll freeze the company accounts, and the residential complex you're finishing will stall. You'll lose more than he stole. We need to either make him expose himself, or wait until the contracts are closed." "I have a plan," I said. "I want him to think he's the king of the world. Let him relax. Let him take more. I want him to have no way out by the time I strike." Summer 2023. I started acting like I was having a mid-life crisis. I told Kyle I was tired of working. I said I wanted to step back from operations, focus on design, and give him more authority. Of course, he was thrilled. I saw that gleam in his eye. He thought I was just a weakling who'd given up. I even started hinting to Lauren that I wanted to buy a bigger house so she could finally spread her wings as a designer. She lit up. She started staying late with friends, more often. I knew she was staying late at the studio with Kyle. It hurt, but I turned that pain into fuel. In July, something happened that nearly blew my cover. We were at a barbecue at mutual friend's house. Kyle was there too. He'd had a bit to drink and came up to me, putting his arm around my shoulders. "Mark, you're my best partner," he said, looking into my eyes. "I appreciate you trusting me with management. Kyle, I replied, I wouldn't have achieved any of this without you. You're like a brother to me. He patted me on the cheek. On the cheek. Like a good dog. At that moment, I nearly punched him. I finished my beer and went to the bathroom, where I spent about 5 minutes staring at my face in the mirror, whispering, calm down. Wait until September. Meanwhile, Kate got in touch with the accountant who managed our company. The accountant was a woman in her 50s whom Kyle had hired without my knowledge. Using her legal leverage, Kate hinted that there was an upcoming IRS audit and that if she didn't want to go down as an accomplice, she'd better testify about who specifically ordered the transfers to K&S Logistics. The accountant cracked within a week. She had emails and messages from Kyle with direct instructions. A gold mine. I chose the date, September 15th. By then, we'd received the final payment for the residential complex. The money was in the account. I secretly withdrew my share, about $400,000, through a lawyer, structuring it as dividends, which I had every right to do under the operating agreement. Kyle didn't know because I forged his signature on the consent. Kate said it was ethically questionable but technically legal, since I was the majority owner with 51%, damn it. On the morning of September 15th, I got up before Lauren. I made breakfast, set out coffee. She came out in her robe, sleepy. Mark, you're looking extra special today, she smiled. Yeah, I said. Today is a special day. I sat down across from her and placed on the table a printout of the parking lot video, photos of the studio, and statements from the corporate card. She didn't understand at first. Then her face began to change. From pink to white, then to gray. What is this? She asked in a trembling voice. This is the "Why I'm Getting Divorced" folder, I said. And this, I pulled out a second folder, is the "Why Kyle is Going to Jail" folder. She started crying. Not theatrically, but genuinely. But it didn't move me. I watched as she frantically tried to grab her phone. If you call him right now, I said, I will call the police before he can wipe his ass. You will sign the divorce papers my sister sends here at noon, on the terms I set. You get exactly what the law requires for 5 years of marriage with no children, not a cent more. Your Audi, which is registered to the company, stays with me. You move out of this house by 6 p.m. today. You can't do this, she whispered. I can, I said. Either you sign the voluntary agreement, or I post this video on Kyle's LinkedIn page, attach the embezzlement calculations, and send it to the district attorney. Your choice. She signed at 2 p.m. Kate arrived with a notary. Lauren packed her things in tears, called her friends, but none of them came to help. Because I'd already, through mutual acquaintances, spread the rumor that she was cheating on me with my business partner. By the time of the divorce, she was socially isolated. She had to move back in with her mother. The divorce was just the appetizer. The main course was Kyle. On Monday, September 18th, I went to the office. Kyle was sitting at his desk, drinking coffee, making plans for the week. I closed the door. Hey, brother, I said. Mark, welcome back. Why the long face? Heard you and Lauren split. Sorry, man. Thanks, Kyle. Yeah, we split. By the way, did she say hi to you? You two haven't been in touch lately, have you? He tensed. I saw his cheek twitch. What do you mean? He said. I placed the printout about K&S Logistics in front of him. This is your cousin's company. You stole $180,000. I know about the studio. I know about everything. He stood up. He was half a head taller than me and 40 pounds heavier. He put his fists on the table. You can't prove anything. My lawyers will tear you apart. It's your word against mine. Not my word, I said. Your own emails, your own accountant, and your cousin, who I've already called and told that if he doesn't testify, I'll drag him in as an accomplice. He's already agreed to cooperate to save his own house. Kyle went pale. I'm offering you a deal, I continued. You sell me your stake in the company for $1. You sign a confession of fraud, which will stay in my lawyer's safe. If you try to open a competing firm or come near me or my family for the next 5 years, that confession goes to the DA. You lose your contractor's license and face 3 to 5 years in prison. You're bluffing, he said, but his voice shook. Kyle, I said, stepping close to him, I spent 3 months pretending I didn't know you were fucking my wife in my own trailer. Do you really think I'd bluff when it comes to kicking you out of my life? You have 24 hours. He didn't cave in 24 hours. He hired a lawyer, but he had no arguments. I didn't just have suspicions, I had bank statements, testimony, photos. 3 days later, he brought signed documents relinquishing his stake in the LLC. He walked out with one backpack of personal items and his old pickup, the one not on the company's books. I took everything. The equipment, the contracts, the reputation. The company, by the way, flourished after his departure. Turns out many clients couldn't stand his arrogance but stayed because of me. I thought that was it. I was divorced, I'd crushed my enemy in business, I was living alone, going to the gym, building muscle, healing my wounds. But the story decided to throw me a curveball. 2 months after the divorce, in November, I got a call from Michelle, Kyle's ex-girlfriend. The one he'd broken up with a year and a half earlier. "Mark," she said, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but there's something I need to tell you. Not over the phone. Let's meet at the park." I agreed out of sheer curiosity. We met by the lake. Michelle looked nervous. "Kyle is a psychopath," she said. "But that's not the main thing. I want you to know why I left him. I found out he wasn't just sleeping with Lauren. He was sleeping with your main subcontractor's wife, with your architect's girlfriend, and with my little sister. But that's not important. What's important is this. What? Lauren didn't just cheat on you. Kyle planned this. He told me that if he married Lauren or made her his permanent girlfriend, he could control you through her. He wanted to force you out of the business through pressure. He specifically ingratiated himself with you to make you step down. He told me how they laughed at you. Lauren fed him details of your business plans that you discussed at home over dinner. She leaked everything to him. I listened, feeling a cold wave run down my spine. I thought it was just lust and passion. It turned out to be a calculated plan to take over my business. My wife wasn't just a cheater, she was an accomplice to an economic conspiracy against me. "Thanks, Michelle," I said. "But it doesn't matter now. He lost everything." "He didn't lose everything," Michelle shook her head. "He's living in Arizona now. He started a new firm with money he managed to siphon off through other schemes you don't know about. He's working with your old foreman, Tom. They're building houses in Scottsdale. And, Mark, Lauren is with him. She moved to him in October." I felt like I'd been electrocuted. Lauren had signed the papers, taken her paltry $20,000 settlement, because I'd wisely had her sign a prenup when she was tipsy a year into the marriage, thanks, Kate. And now she was back with him. So the whole divorce drama, her tears, was that just a performance to keep me from going after her in court? Or was she really so in love with him that she was willing to live with a man who'd lost everything because of me? I couldn't let it go. The revenge was incomplete. I thought I'd kicked him out of business, but he'd just moved to another state and kept going, using my own methods and poaching my employee. Tom had been my foreman for 3 years. I trusted him. Turns out he was part of the scheme too. I went back to Kate. "Sis, I want to finish him. But now it's out of our jurisdiction. He's in Arizona." "Mark," Kate sighed, "you've already won. You've got the company, the money, your health. Let it go." "I can't. They screwed in my bed while I worked on a job site at 3 a.m. They stole my money. I want him bankrupt. Legally." Kate sighed, but she helped. She found a lawyer in Arizona specializing in construction fraud. I handed over all the information I had. The K&S logistics scheme, the accountant's testimony, Michelle's account of Kyle bragging about the conspiracy. But the key was Tom. Or rather, I had leverage over Tom. I invited Tom to meet on neutral ground. I didn't yell. I just said, "Tom, you left to work with Kyle. That's your right. But I know that while working for me, you leaked tender information to him. That's a breach of your NDA. Your contract with me has a $50,000 penalty per instance of disclosing trade secrets. I've counted 4 instances. You owe me $200,000, which you don't have. Either you become my witness in Arizona, and I forgive the debt and even give you a reference letter, honest, but omitting these details, or I sue you, and you lose your foreman's license for good." Tom sat there, spinning his cap in his hands. He was a working-class guy who got caught up in a charismatic asshole's orbit. "You want me to testify against Kyle?" he asked. "I want you to tell the court how Kyle paid you cash to pass on my estimates and client contacts. And how he planned to drive me out of the market using shell companies." "He'll kill me," Tom said. "He's a builder, not a hitman," I replied. "Your choice." Tom agreed. We started the process. But I didn't just want a lawsuit. I wanted public humiliation. I hired a freelance writer who, for a modest fee, wrote a series of posts in local Texas and Arizona construction groups on Facebook and LinkedIn. No names, just hints. How a business partner can steal your company while sleeping with your wife. The story went viral in niche circles. Contractors in Arizona started recognizing Kyle. His new firm, Desert Star Construction, was blacklisted by 2 major developers who didn't want to be associated with a shady reputation. In February 2024, the arbitration hearing took place for my company's claim against Kyle for damages. Formally, it was a civil case, but because we presented evidence of forgery and fraud, the judge referred the materials to the Travis County, Texas, District Attorney's Office to initiate a criminal case. Lauren wasn't at the hearing, but Kyle was. He looked terrible. He'd lost weight, and he had a bald spot that wasn't there before. He looked at me with so much hatred I could feel it physically. His lawyer tried to argue that it was a corporate dispute, that I had abused my rights, and suppressed the will of my partner. But when Tom took the stand and explained how Kyle had instructed him to make sure Mark's projects fell behind schedule, while Kyle offered clients discounts by inflating our estimates, the room went silent. The judge ordered Kyle to pay me $380,000, damages plus penalties plus legal fees. In addition, the criminal case for embezzlement in an especially large amount was sent to a grand jury. But the most interesting thing happened after the trial. I was leaving the courthouse when Lauren intercepted me. She was standing on the steps in a cheap coat, no makeup. "Mark," she said, "stop, please. You're destroying him. He can't handle prison. He has health problems. I'm asking you, as someone I once loved." I looked at her. I'd been waiting for this moment for 2 years. "Did you ever love me, Lauren?" I asked. She was silent. "Did you feed him information about my bids? Did you tell him what I told you at night in bed so he could use it against me in meetings the next day?" She looked down. "That was confirmation. You know," I said, "if you just slept with him once, I might have gotten over it. But you were part of a plan to destroy me. You sat at my table, ate my food, spent my money, and laughed at me with him. As far as I'm concerned, you're dead. Go and support your lover in prison. I hope it was worth it." I turned and walked away. She shouted something after me, but I didn't look back. It seemed like a happy ending. The villain was punished, the traitor faded away, the hero, me, was left with the company, the money, and a clear conscience. But this is Reddit, and life has a sense of humor. In June 2024, as Kyle's criminal case was moving towards sentencing, he was facing 4 years probation due to no prior convictions, but with asset forfeiture, I received a letter in the mail. From Lauren, handwritten. I wanted to throw it out, but Kate said, "Open it. Maybe there's something in there that will help in the case against Kyle." I opened it. The letter was 3 pages long. And it turned my understanding of the situation upside down. Lauren wrote that she was pregnant with Kyle's child, but that wasn't the main thing. She wrote that Kyle had beaten her when he found out about the pregnancy because he didn't want children. She wrote that he blamed her for setting him up, for not keeping Mark in line. She wrote that he was living off her money, that he'd taken all the savings she'd gotten from the divorce settlement, and that she was now living in a women's shelter in Phoenix. She apologized, not for the affair. She knew that was unforgivable. She apologized for letting him use me as a weapon against you. She wrote, "He told me you were weak, that you were a nobody, that he would make a man out of you. I believed him because I was flattered by a strong man's attention. I was an idiot. Now I understand that strength was in you. You always built, and he only destroyed." I read that letter 10 times. My sister Kate, after reading it, said, "Don't you dare. Don't you dare respond. This is a trap. She wants to invoke your pity so you'll drop the case against Kyle. Take off the rose-colored glasses." I didn't respond, but the letter wouldn't leave me alone. I hired investigator Dan again. I asked him to check out the shelter in Phoenix. Within 3 days, Dan sent a report. She really was living there. With bruises on her arms, the medical report was included. Kyle had indeed been arrested for domestic violence in Arizona a month earlier, but was out on bail. My world flipped upside down. I hated Lauren. I wanted her to disappear. But now I found out that the man I was destroying had raised his hand against a woman, even if she was my ex, even if she'd betrayed me. And she was carrying a child. I wasn't going to save Lauren. I'm no knight in shining armor. But I realized I couldn't let Kyle walk away clean this time. The criminal fraud case was one thing. Domestic violence and threats were another. I contacted the prosecutor in Arizona handling Kyle's assault case and handed over all the material I had on his character. Michelle's testimony about how he'd threatened her, letters from Lauren, with her consent. I did call her, but the conversation was cold, strictly business, security footage from the studio that Dan had obtained showing Kyle throwing Lauren's belongings onto the stairwell landing. Ultimately, in August 2024, Kyle didn't get probation. The judge in Texas sentenced him to 3 years in state correctional facility for embezzlement, and the court in Arizona added 1.5 years for domestic violence, to be served concurrently in Texas. End result: 3 years actual prison time, forfeiture of all assets, including the house in Arizona he'd bought with stolen money, and a 10-year ban on construction work in 3 states. Lauren was left alone. She gave birth in September. A boy. She named him Mark. I still don't know how to feel about that. When Kate found out, she said, "That's pure manipulation." I'm not so sure. I'm sitting in my new apartment right now. I sold the house Lauren and I lived in because those walls made me sick. I focused on the business. MK Construct is now called M. Holt Industries. I have 35 employees, and we've won a contract to build a school in suburban Austin. Financially, I'm better off than ever. Personally, I'm a complete mess. I can't trust people. I've tried dating, but when I see a woman laughing with another man, my eye starts twitching, and I want to check her phone. I see a therapist twice a week. The doctor says I have PTSD from prolonged betrayal in a close relationship. The revenge was sweet. I won't lie. Watching Kyle being led away in handcuffs from the courtroom was one of the most satisfying feelings of my life. But the aftertaste was bitter. I spent 2 years of my life not building, but destroying. Yes, I was defending myself. Yes, I got back what was mine. But I've become a hard, cynical asshole. I've lost the ability to enjoy small things. Lauren keeps trying to contact me. She sends photos of the baby. I don't open them, but Kate says the boy looks like me. That's obviously nonsense. He's Kyle and Lauren's son. But she says he has the same eyes. My therapist told me last week, "Mark, you won the battle, but you let your enemy define the rules of war. Your task now is to learn to live in a world without Kyle and Lauren. Because if you keep monitoring them, you'll remain in the same cage, only now you're the guard." I'm trying. I bought a motorcycle. I ride through the Texas hills alone, listening to music, trying not to think about how she laughed with him in my living room. If you've made it this far, thank you. I needed to vent. Here are a few takeaways. If you have a business partner, hire an independent accountant. Don't let anyone, even a brother, handle the finances alone. A prenup isn't about mistrust. It's about respecting your future. If it weren't for Kate, who made me sign one early in the marriage, just in case, Lauren would have walked away with half the company. Having a lawyer in the family is both a blessing and a curse. Kate saved my business, but she also turned me into a machine for gathering compromising material. Sometimes I catch myself thinking I've become as cold and calculating as Kyle, only with legal backup. Revenge doesn't bring happiness. It brings satisfaction. They're different things. Satisfaction is watching your enemy fall. Happiness is waking up in the morning and not wanting to kill anyone. I don't have happiness right now. I have a void I'm trying to fill with work. A week ago, I went to dinner with Kate and her husband. They're expecting their second child. Over dinner, they were discussing names. Kate said, "If it's a boy, let's name him Mark. After Uncle Mark. You're a role model of resilience for me." I nearly choked on my wine. "Don't," I said. "Don't name kids after me. I'm not a role model. I'm just a guy who got really angry and had good legal support." "You destroyed a man who tried to bankrupt you," Kate's husband said. "That deserves respect." "I destroyed a man," I repeated. "And I sent a woman I loved to a homeless shelter with a child." Yes, they deserved it. But that doesn't make me a hero. It makes me a judge, an executioner, and a victim all rolled into one. After dinner, I drove home. Passing by the old house, I saw new people living there. A swing set stood in the yard. I stopped for a minute, looking at those swings, and for some reason remembered when Lauren and I first moved in, and she bought a pot of lavender and put it on the porch. I thought then, this is my family. My home. Now that house belongs to others. The lavender is gone, and all I have is money, a company, and a mountain of text I'm now posting on Reddit, hoping that someone reading this who is at the beginning of a similar path will stop and think, is it worth it? Don't let hate define your life. Even if you think you're 1000% in the right. I was right. I won. But the price of that victory was 2 years of my life, my peace of mind, and my ability to trust people. Kyle will be out in 3 years. Lauren will probably try to come back into my life through that child. And I'll stay here, in the silence, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Thanks for reading. If you have questions, ask. I'll try to answer everything. Update. To answer the main question that came into my DMs. No, I'm not going to help Lauren financially. I donated money anonymously to the shelter where she was staying, but not to her personally. The child isn't at fault, but he's also not mine. I can't be responsible for the consequences of her choices. That may be harsh, but it's my boundary. Take care, everyone. Value the people around you. And check your bank statements. Story 2. My name is Lisa. I'm 34. My ex-husband is Mark, he's 36. We were together for 12 years, married for 8. We met in college. I was an English literature major, so I was always working as a proofreader and editor on the side. Mark was studying mechanical engineering. Smart, charismatic, he loved saying, "Engineers save the world," while humanities majors just wrote about how engineers did it. I laughed back then. The first red flag appeared during our senior year when he had to turn in his thesis project. Mark was a brilliant conceptualist, but he couldn't stand boring paperwork. He could sketch an idea on a napkin, but turning it into 120 pages of text with formulas, footnotes, and justifications was torture for him. I spent 3 nights rewriting his thesis. I fixed the grammar, formatted the bibliography according to standards, proofread the calculations. He graduated with honors. He cried from happiness and said he wouldn't have made it without me. Back then, I felt needed. Then came grad school, then his career. I worked remotely as a freelance editor, eventually working my way up to managing a small digital agency. My income was steady, but not like his. Mark went to work for a large company, and after 3 years, he decided to open his own engineering firm. Mark Sullivan Engineering Solutions. Sounded fancy. From that point on, I wasn't just his wife. I became his full-time lackey. He handled the technical side, client meetings, and presentations. I handled everything else. I did his accounting. I taught myself because the accountant he hired kept messing up the numbers. I wrote the proposals. I drafted contracts for clients, finding templates and adapting them. I answered all the emails. I handled tax filings. I hired and fired employees. I organized his business trips. And I did all of this after my own job. Or instead of it. At some point, I quit my full-time job because Mark said, "Why do you need that? I make enough. I need you here. We're a team. We're a team," was his favorite phrase when he asked me to work through the night. I didn't receive a salary. I had access to our joint credit card, but he monitored every single charge. If I bought myself an expensive face cream or a new toy for Walter, our dachshund, he'd say, "Honey, we need to save money, we just started the business." But he'd buy himself a $3,000 tool or go to conferences in Las Vegas without a second thought. But I was in love. Or rather, I was used to being the girl who organizes everything. I was proud that he was successful because of me. I thought we had a perfect partnership. We didn't have kids. I always wanted them, but he kept putting it off. First let the business get on its feet, then we'll buy a bigger house, then we'll have kids. I was 32 and starting to get worried, but he said, "Let's get a dog first, for practice." That's how we got Walter. A silly, chubby, balding dachshund. The dog became my main source of love and warmth in that house. So, the setup. About a year and a half ago, Mark hired a new intern. A girl named Brittany. She was 22, just graduated with a degree in project management. Mark came back from the interview and said, "She's incredibly promising. Driven, sharp, and so energetic." I didn't think much of that word, energetic, at the time. The first 6 months were fine. Brittany was polite to me at company events, called me Mrs. Sullivan, asked for advice. I even tried to mentor her on how to handle documents. She was a quick learner. But then Mark started to change. He began staying late at work more often. He'd say they had a big project and needed to stay late with the team. I believed him because I was often stuck at home with paperwork. But then I noticed he started paying more attention to himself. He bought new cologne, started going to the gym, which he did for a month and then quit, and started making snide comments about my appearance. One time, when I came to breakfast in a stretched-out t-shirt, I worked from home. Seriously, he said, Lee, you should fix yourself up a bit. You look like my mother, not my wife. That stung. I replied, I look like a woman who's been handling your accounting at 3 a.m. for the past 5 years. He rolled his eyes. He said I was always wallowing in my victimhood. That's when I started digging. I'm not proud of it, but we had a shared laptop that he sometimes used at home. I didn't go through his phone. I went through the browser history on the shared computer. He was stupid enough not to delete it. There were tons of searches. Gift for 22-year-old girlfriend, romantic dinners Santa Barbara, how to tell wife you want divorce. I started shaking. I read the last search and closed the laptop. I went out to the backyard and sat there for an hour, just staring at Walter chasing lizards. My first thought was, well, this is the end. My second thought was, he doesn't get to just kick me out. I put 5 years of my life into this company without a salary. I didn't cause a scene. I'm a systematic person. I knew if I started screaming, he'd paint me as a hysterical woman, kick me out of the company, and I'd be left with nothing. I started gathering information. First thing I did was hire a private investigator. Yeah, it sounds like something from a TV show, but guys, it was worth every penny. The investigator, a woman named Susan, was pure gold. Within 2 weeks, she had photos and videos. Mark and Brittany were kissing in the office parking lot. They were checking into a hotel for lunch. Seriously, who goes to a hotel for lunch? She bought a membership to the same gym Mark went to. Susan even caught them buying a yoga mat together. Mark hated yoga. When Susan handed me the USB drive, I sat in my car and looked at the photos. In one of them, Brittany was sitting in the passenger seat of his car with her feet on the dashboard, holding his hand. On her hand was my favorite ring. No, not the wedding ring. The one I bought for myself on our anniversary, a small one with an aquamarine. Mark had given it to her. I'd searched for that ring for a month, thinking I'd lost it while cleaning. It was in a box on a shelf in the garage. He just took it and gave it to his mistress. Something broke inside me at that moment. Not from the hurt, no. The hurt faded quickly. What broke was something like patience. I decided I wasn't just going to leave. I was going to take everything I was owed, and then some. Mark had no idea I knew. I acted like usual. Cooked dinner, ironed his shirts, handled his accounting. But now I did it with a cold head. I started copying all the company's financial documents from the last 5 years. I had full access to his business accounts, QuickBooks, tax returns. I found a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but one specializing in divorce with a focus on business assets. His name was David. I went to him with a folder full of documents. David was skeptical at first, typical dumped wife, but when I laid out the printouts in front of him, he raised an eyebrow and said, "You handled the accounting?" "Yes," I said, "and I wasn't paid a salary. But I don't just want a salary. I want a share of the company." David looked at me and said, "That'll be tricky, but if we can prove your work was foundational, then yes. Also, if he spent marital funds on his mistress, we can seek compensation. But be prepared for him to argue that your work for him means you were essentially an employee." I said, "David, he never signed an employment contract with me, never paid taxes on my salary, never made social security contributions. If he claims I was an employee, he'll be admitting to tax violations. He's smart enough not to say that. He'll say I was a loving wife who helped out. But I have the logins, passwords, and emails where he writes to me, draw up a contract for client X, and pay the taxes so we don't miss the deadline." David smiled. We started preparing the documents. In parallel, I was working on revenge, on a smaller, more domestic level that Mark never suspected. I changed the password on our joint pet store account where we ordered food for Walter. Now I ordered his food using Mark's card, but it was delivered in my name. I changed all the loyalty cards at supermarkets to my name. I started moving money from our joint savings account to my personal account, justifying it as buying new appliances for the house. Which, of course, I never bought. But I did it carefully, in small amounts, to avoid raising suspicion. Most importantly, I found his messages with Brittany. No, I didn't hack his phone. Mark, being a genius, used iCloud, and his messages synced to the iPad that was sitting in the living room. I just opened it every night while he was in the shower. I read their sweet little conversations. Brittany called him, my lion, he called her, princess. She wrote, "When are you finally going to tell that frump you're leaving?" He replied, "Soon, babe." I need to move the assets so she doesn't get a cent." After reading that, I felt nothing but determination. He was planning to move assets. In other words, steal our joint money before the divorce. This wasn't just infidelity anymore, it was fraud. I forwarded the screenshots to David. He said, "This is gold. Judges hate this." I was waiting for the right moment. Mark was going on a business trip to Chicago for 3 days. I knew Brittany was going with him, the investigator told me. I decided this was the perfect time to disappear. While he was on the plane, I executed the plan. I hired movers. In 6 hours, they cleared out of the house everything that was bought with my money or was my personal property. We bought the furniture together, but I only took what my parents had given me, an old antique table, and the electronics I'd paid for with my personal card. But most importantly, I cleared out his office. Laptops, jointly owned, but legally they were company property, all the paperwork I'd been handling, the hard drives with backups. I left bare walls, his clothes in the closet, and the couch. I left for a hotel in another city, taking Walter. Mark came back from the trip a day early because Brittany wanted to surprise him and visit the house. I knew this because I saw their messages on the iPad, which I also took. It was jointly owned. At 11 a.m., I got a text from him. "Where the FCK is the furniture? Where's my computer? Where's the dog? What's going on?" I didn't reply. After 15 minutes, the calls started. I declined. Then a message came. "If this is a joke, it's not funny. Put everything back." That's when I finally replied. I wrote, "Hi Mark. I know everything about Brittany, the hotels, the ring. Don't look for me. Contact my lawyer, David, number. All communication goes through him. P.S. I've locked you out of QuickBooks. But don't worry, I have all the backups." He lost it. He started sending nasty messages, threatening to report me to the police for theft. I sent him a screenshot of his messages with Brittany about moving assets and said, "Go ahead. While you're at it, ask the police how they feel about hiding marital assets." That was the end of our personal communication. What followed was hell. It lasted 8 months. I lived in a rental apartment in another state because Mark tried to use mutual acquaintances in the police force to find my address so he could come and talk. I changed my number. I worked remotely, thankfully my freelancing allowed it. Mark hired a lawyer, expensive, a real shark named Harry. Their initial strategy was to portray me as a mentally unstable shrew who stole company equipment and was blackmailing a poor businessman. At the first hearing for temporary orders, their lawyer claimed I had stolen corporate documents and damaged the business. My lawyer, David, stood up and said, "Your Honor, my client performed the functions of CFO, HR director, and office manager for 5 years without compensation. The documents were removed by her to preserve evidence, as there is reason to believe the respondent intended to destroy financial records that would show his attempts to move assets. We have written evidence of this intent." The judge asked to see the evidence. David submitted the printouts of Mark's messages with Brittany. The mistress's name was redacted, but the content was clear. There were phrases like, "We need to transfer the car into your name before she files," and, "I'll transfer the money from the business account to a trust account she won't find." Harry, Mark's lawyer, went pale. Mark sat with a stony face. I watched him through the Zoom screen. I was remote sometimes, and I could see the hatred in his eyes. It was cold, like a rattlesnake's. I'd never seen him look like that. Even when we fought over dirty dishes. The judge ruled that I had to return the laptops, but with the condition that an independent expert would first mirror all the data. The judge also froze the company accounts until the matter was resolved. Mark couldn't move a cent. That was the first blow. Then came the process of evaluating my contribution. We hired a financial expert who calculated the market value of the work I'd done over 5 years. It came out to around $480,000. But we weren't asking for that amount as back pay. We were asking for my contribution to be recognized as having increased the company's value, and therefore I was entitled to 50% ownership of the business, since the business was started and grew during the marriage. Mark claimed I was just a housewife who occasionally helped with paperwork. That's when David called several of his former clients to testify. I had prepared the list. One client testified under oath. Mrs. Sullivan handled all the contract negotiations. I thought she was the business owner. Mark only showed up to the sites. All the paperwork, estimates, and invoices came from her. A second client confirmed that I personally signed off on completion certificates. Yes, I sometimes signed them when Mark wasn't around, with his electronic permission. That wasn't entirely above board legally on his part, but for the court, it was proof that I was a key manager. The climax of the trial came when David questioned Mark under oath. "Mr. Sullivan, you claim your wife did not make a substantial contribution to the business?" "Yes, she only performed routine home office tasks." "Then why, in 5 years, did you never hire a full-time professional accountant?" "Because we were saving money." "Saving money by using your wife's unpaid labor. Did you pay her a salary?" "No, we were married. It was a family contribution." "A family contribution. Yet you transferred $45,000 to your employee Brittany M's personal card over the last 6 months, listing these transfers in your reports as consulting fees. Can you explain to the court what kind of consulting a 22-year-old intern was providing you for that amount of money?" The room went silent. Mark turned red, then pale. He started mumbling something about marketing help. David then presented hotel receipts and restaurant bills that the investigator had gathered. The judge looked at Mark with an expression I will never forget. It was the look of, "You, sir, are an idiot." In the end, the court reached a decision that I consider my main victory. The company was declared marital property. I was awarded 50% of the company shares. Mark was required to buy out my share within 18 months, failing which the company would be put up for auction. In addition to the share buyout, he was ordered to pay me compensation for unjust enrichment, the $480,000 figure, but reduced because the 50% share covered part of it, $150,000 in cash. He was ordered to pay my legal fees in full. Struck out. And the cherry on top. The judge ruled that since Mark used marital funds to finance his romantic relationship with an employee, this was considered dissipation of marital assets, and he was required to repay the joint account all the money spent on Brittany, hotels, restaurants, gifts, over the past 2 years. That came out to around $65,000. When the decision was announced, Mark jumped up and shouted at his lawyer, "You said she'd get nothing." His lawyer, Harry, calmly packed his papers and said, "I wasn't aware your wife was keeping a record of every move you made, Mark. My services are no longer required." And he left. That was 6 months ago. I'm in Minnesota now because Mark filed an appeal, and we're waiting for the hearings, but my lawyer says he has no chance. I could go back to California, but I bought a small house here with that $150,000, plus some of my own savings. Walter likes it here. There's a lawn for hunting moles. Brittany, I heard from former colleagues, quit 2 weeks after the first hearing. Apparently, when the financial details came to light and she had to testify, she was called as a witness. She realized that building a relationship with a man who just had half his business seized and was ordered to pay a huge settlement wasn't as rosy as she'd thought. I heard she moved back in with her parents in Idaho. Mark was left alone in our old house. He had to sell his sports car to make the first payment to me. The funniest part. A month after the trial, one of his major clients called me. He said, "Lisa, we're used to working with you. You always handled the paperwork. Mark can't find a single contract right now. Could you maybe?" I politely declined and recommended another engineering consultant to them, who ended up signing the contract. Mark lost a client. I didn't even do it on purpose. It just turned out that clients valued not his brilliant engineering ideas, but the fact that I handled all the paperwork and submitted it on time. Right now, I work as a freelancer, but for myself. I do accounting for a few small firms. I have Walter, I have a house, and I have a sense of self-respect that I apparently sold for the title of entrepreneur's wife. Sometimes I wonder if it was worth it. Those months of trials, moving, constant stress. But then I remember how he called me a frump in his messages with the mistress, and how he planned to leave me with nothing, and I know. Yes, it was worth it. The moral of this story isn't that you should get revenge. The moral is that if you're running your husband's business, register yourself as a co-owner. If you're working for him, get an employment contract. And always have a financial cushion that no one knows about. And if you smell infidelity, don't start a screaming fight with smashed plates. Go to a lawyer. My ex-husband currently owes me over $400,000 for the share buyout, plus interest, because he's dragging his feet. I'm not worried. If he doesn't pay, I'll become a co-owner of his company, and I'll have every right to walk in there and sit in his chair. And believe me, I will. With Walter in my arms. UPD, 3 days later. Guys, thank you for the support. I read all the comments. Answers to common questions. Why didn't you leave earlier? Because I believed in the "we're a team" line. Because abuse isn't always physical. It's the gradual devaluation, being turned into a function and then discarded. I thought if I was indispensable, he wouldn't leave me. Foolish. How's Walter? Walter's gotten even chubbier because I spoil him with salmon. He sleeps on my pillow and snores. He's the only man in my life right now, and I'm not planning on adding any more. How did friends, family react? His family didn't defend me. My mother-in-law said, "You brought it on yourself, you're too controlling." My parents were furious. My dad wanted to come and have a word with Mark, but I talked him out of it. Friends were divided. Some said I went too far with the lawsuit. I don't talk to those friends anymore. Do you feel sorry for him? Sometimes at night when I'm having wine, I feel something like pity. But then I remember that I don't have a single photo from our wedding because he deleted them from the cloud when he got the equipment back. He wanted to erase me from his life. I just didn't let him erase my money. Thanks, everyone. If there are any new developments, like the appeal or if he goes bankrupt, I'll post an update. UPD2, 8 months later. Hi, everyone who bookmarked this post. I promised a finale, and here it is. Mark's appeal was denied. The higher court upheld the decision. After that, Mark realized fighting was useless. He couldn't secure a loan to buy out my share within the 18 months because banks looked at the court ruling and the fact that the business was generating less income after I left. Surprise, surprise. In the end, by court order, Mark Sullivan Engineering Solutions was put up for auction. And guess who bought it? My old acquaintance, Tom. The same client who called me asking for help with his contracts. Tom had been looking to expand. He bought the company for 60% of its market value because Mark was forced to accept the deal, otherwise he'd have faced bankruptcy. Mark got his share from the sale, 40% of the amount, because my 50% went directly to me, paid me the remainder of what he owed, and is now, by all accounts, working as an engineer at a large firm on a salary. He tried to sue me for intentional damage to business reputation, but his lawyer turned him down because I never made any public statements. Everything I did was within the legal proceedings. As for me, I'm living in my house in Minnesota, working for myself, and I have a new boyfriend. His name is Dan, he works in IT security. He knows my whole story and said, if I ever try to pull anything like that, you're welcome to hack me, okay? We laugh about it. Life is getting better. And Mark, I heard Brittany ended up marrying some guy from her hometown in Idaho after everything. So Mark has nothing left. No wife who ran his business, no mistress, and no company. I don't feel joy, I feel peace. And that, I guess, is the best revenge. Thanks to everyone who read this. Walter sends licks to your noses. Story 3. My name is Mark, 38 years old now. My ex-fiancée is Jessica, 35. My former best friend is Kyle, 39. Kyle and I knew each other for 22 years. We met in a school hallway when he dropped his lunch, and I shared my sandwich because I had two. Sounds cliché, but it's true. We were inseparable after that. We went to college together, shared an apartment sophomore year, and started our careers around the same time. Kyle was always the golden boy, charismatic, confident, from a good family. His father owned a chain of hardware stores in our state. I was the son of a teacher and a bus driver. But Kyle never looked down on me. At least, that's what I thought. Jessica came into the picture 7 years ago. She was working as an admin at a fitness center that Kyle and I went to on weekends. She was classically beautiful in an American way. Blonde hair, athletic build, always smiling. I fell for her almost immediately. Kyle was married to a girl named Stacy at the time. Stacy was quiet, sweet, worked at a library. They seemed like the boring perfect couple. Kyle approved of my choice. He said, "Dude, she's fire. Go for it." We dated for 2 years before I proposed. I bought a ring for $8,000. That was a huge sum for me. I was working as an engineer at a construction company, making good money, but not crazy money. Kyle was already working with his father by then and was swimming in it. Jessica said, yes. I was over the moon. We started planning the wedding. And that's when things started getting weird. Kyle had divorced Stacy about 6 months before my engagement. He said they just outgrew each other. Stacy moved back to her parents in Oregon, and I barely heard about her. Kyle started hanging around with us more. At first, I was happy. My best friend and my fiancé got along. They laughed at the same jokes, discussed TV shows I didn't watch because I was working a lot. I was working a lot back then. I was taking overtime to pay for the venue, the photographer, the honeymoon. Kyle, on the other hand, offered to help Jessica with the wedding planning because he had free time and great taste. Jessica was thrilled. She would say, "Mark, Kyle is so generous. He's offering to pay for half the banquet hall as a wedding gift." I remember something tightening in my chest, but I brushed it off. I thought, this is Kyle. He's my brother. He's just helping. 3 months before the wedding, I started noticing small things. I'd come home after a shift, and there would be empty bottles of expensive beer in the trash that I didn't buy. Jessica said Kyle had come by to hang out on the porch while I was gone. I asked why he was coming over when I wasn't there. She said, "You know he's going through a tough divorce. He needs someone to talk to. You're always at work." I tried to talk to Kyle. We met at a bar. I said, "Look, I appreciate you helping with the planning, but maybe ease up a bit? Jess and I need to handle this ourselves." Kyle looked at me with a slight confusion. He leaned back in his chair and said, "Mark, dude, you're busting your ass to provide for her. I'm just keeping her entertained so she doesn't complain about you being gone all the time. Don't be paranoid." He slapped me on the shoulder. I felt petty and ungrateful. Jessica started changing. She began buying things that were out of her price range. When I asked where the money came from, she'd say, "Kyle gave me a gift certificate to that boutique. He had leftover loyalty points." She grew more irritated with me. If I couldn't make a meeting with the wedding planner because of work, she'd roll her eyes and say, "Fine, I'll call Kyle. At least he understands style." I felt like I was becoming a third wheel in my own relationship. A month before the wedding, I broke my leg on a construction site. Not bad, a fracture, a cast for 3 weeks. I had to take sick leave. I thought that now I'd finally be involved in the planning. We could pick flowers and menus together. But Jessica said I'd just get in the way on crutches and that she and Kyle would handle everything. I stayed home, sat in the living room, watched TV, feeling like an invalid. Then, 2 weeks before the wedding, I decided to surprise her. I knew she was going for her final dress fitting. Kyle offered to drive her because my car was in the shop and his SUV was more convenient. I called an Uber to show up at the bridal shop and see her in the dress first. I was being romantic. I got to the shop. The saleswoman gave me a strange look. I asked about Jessica. She said, "Oh, Miss Jessica? She was here this morning. She left about an hour ago with a tall, dark-haired gentleman." I called Jessica. No answer. I called Kyle. No answer. I got back in the Uber. I had a bad feeling. Not just jealousy, but a physical sensation that the ground was giving way. I thought back to everything. The beer bottles, the gift cards, his gaze, her irritation. I asked the driver to wait near my house. The house was dark, but Kyle's SUV was in the alley behind the house, parked where I usually parked. It was positioned so it couldn't be seen from the street. I paid the driver, sent him off, and hobbled around the house on my crutches to the back door. The back door was unlocked. The kitchen light was on. I heard music coming from the bedroom. Quiet. I didn't yell. I just walked in. I opened the bedroom door. They didn't even hear me come in because of the music. Jessica was in lingerie, the one she supposedly bought for the honeymoon, which I'd never seen before. Kyle was shirtless. They were on our bed. The same bed where Jessica and I slept. I stood there in my cast, holding a crutch. Kyle saw me first. His face didn't look scared. It looked annoyed, like I'd interrupted an important meeting. Jessica spun around, screamed, and pulled the covers up. Silence. I waited for her to start crying, to make excuses, to say it was a mistake. She said, "Mark, we need to talk." I said, "Get out." Kyle stood up and put on his pants. He walked right up to me. He was half a foot taller. He said, "Mark, don't make a big deal out of this. You and Jessica, you're on different wavelengths. You're always working. She deserves attention. You brought this on yourself." I gripped my crutch so hard my knuckles went white. I said, "If you don't leave right now, I'll smash your head in with this crutch, and I don't care what happens next." He smirked, actually smirked, and walked out. Jessica stayed. She started crying. She said, "It started by accident. You were so busy. He was there. He understands me. He promised to help me with my career. He wants to open a fitness studio for me. Mark, you're a good guy, but you don't have the opportunities he does." I took off the ring she gave me, a simple silver band, an engagement gift, and put it on the nightstand. I said, "Pack your things. I want both of you out of my life." She left for Kyle's that same night. I canceled the wedding, lost about $15,000 in non-refundable deposits. I sat alone in the apartment that smelled like her perfume and drank whiskey. I didn't eat. I lost 20 pounds in a month. Our mutual friends split. Most sided with Kyle, because Kyle was successful. He had the house, the money, the connections. I was just an engineer whose fiancée left him. I heard the rumors. Mark was too toxic. Jessica said he ignored her. Kyle just helped her get out of a bad relationship. They rewrote history. I became the villain. I was in a depression for 3 weeks. Then I called Stacy, Kyle's ex-wife. I didn't know why. Maybe I needed to hear I wasn't alone. Stacy was in Oregon. She picked up after 2 rains. I asked how she was. She said, "Mark, I heard about Jessica and Kyle. I'm sorry." I asked, "Stacy, why did you guys get divorced?" He said, "You grew apart." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said a sentence that became my starting point. "Mark, Kyle doesn't throw away things that belong to him. He takes them. Your fiancée wasn't the first girlfriend of mine he stole. And she wasn't the second. He's always done this. Before it was cars, contracts, clients. Then he moved on to wives. He's a psychopath. He needs to feel like he can take anyone's most valuable thing." I asked, "Why didn't you tell me before?" She said, "Because you wouldn't have believed me. You two were brothers for life. Besides, I was scared. His father has money. He has lawyers. When I tried to take half the assets in the divorce, they dragged it out for 2 years, and I ended up with nothing. Literally nothing. He transferred assets before the divorce. Be careful, Mark. He didn't just take your girlfriend. He destroys people who cross him." I hung up. Something clicked inside me. The grief faded. What was left was cold, clean rage. I swore to myself I wouldn't just move on. I decided I would study Kyle's business inside and out. I would figure out how to land a blow he couldn't recover from. But it would take time. Kyle didn't just take my fiancée. He started openly gloating. A month after Jessica left, I got an invite to a housewarming. They bought a house together. Jessica posted a photo on Instagram. Them standing in front of a white picket fence, caption, "A new chapter with my man." Kyle commented, "Best thing I ever took from Mark." Yeah, he actually wrote that. He was so arrogant he didn't even hide it. I didn't respond. I just took a screenshot. I quit my job. I knew that working as an engineer, I'd never accumulate the resources to go up against Kyle's family business. But I had experience and knowledge in construction and logistics. I went to work for a small wholesale building materials company. The pay was lower, but I got access to supply chains. I started studying Kyle's father's business, K&K Building Supplies. It was a chain of 12 stores across 3 states. They were big, but not a monopoly. Their main problem was that they operated on old models. They relied on old contracts with large developers and the reputation of the father. Kyle was VP of development, but he didn't actually develop anything. He just spent money and used connections to handle issues. I spent 6 months analyzing. I found out that their main supplier of cement and dry mixes was a company called Coastal Materials. The contract had been signed 10 years ago on terms very favorable to K&K because the market was different back then. Coastal Materials wanted to renegotiate, but Kyle, or his father, kept stalling, using the old contract. I also found a guy. His name was Tom. Tom had been the financial controller at one of K&K's warehouses but was fired 2 years before my story. Why? Because he discovered that Kyle was siphoning company money into personal accounts through shell companies, classifying it as consulting fees. When Tom went to Kyle's father with this, the old, sick man said, "Handle this quietly." Tom was fired on fabricated charges of theft, ironic, and given a small severance to keep quiet. I found Tom on LinkedIn. We met in a rundown diner. At first, he didn't want to talk. He was scared. I said, "Tom, I'm not a journalist. I'm a guy whose life that bastard destroyed. I don't just want revenge, I want him to lose everything. I have a plan, but I need the numbers." Tom stared at me for 5 minutes. Then he said, "If we lose, I have a wife and 2 kids. I can't risk it." I said, "I have nothing but a cast on my leg and a broken heart. I'm risking everything. Let's just talk." He told me everything. The scheme was simple and brazen. Kyle set up a shell company called Apex Logistics. He inflated transportation invoices to K&K. He pocketed the difference. Over 3 years, he siphoned about $2.5 million. He also used company funds to finance his lifestyle. The cars, the house he bought with Jessica were partially paid for with corporate cards disguised as entertainment expenses. Tom had copies of some documents. He'd taken them before he was fired, just in case. He handed me a flash drive. I realized I had a nuclear bomb. But just detonating it wasn't enough. Kyle's family had lawyers. If I just leaked the docs to the IRS, they'd pin it on some hired accountant, pay a fine, and move on. I didn't want a fine. I wanted bankruptcy and reputation destruction. I started saving money. I lived on bread and water. I worked at my trading company and started consulting for small construction firms on procurement optimization. I built a reputation as a guy who knew how to save money on materials. A year after the betrayal, I met an older gentleman named Richard. Richard owned a chain of 3 hardware stores that were direct competitors to K&K in our region, but they were on the verge of closing. His stores were old, his staff was demotivated, and his procurement was inefficient. Richard was looking for a partner who could bring brains to the business. I didn't have money to buy a stake, but I offered him a deal. I'd optimize his supply chain and logistics for 5% of profits in the first year and 15% after hitting targets. Richard agreed. He saw I was hungry and smart. I overhauled his business. I broke old contracts, found new suppliers, including coastal materials, but at a better price than K&K because I knew their pain point. They needed to move volume. I automated inventory. Within 18 months, we increased Richard's revenue by 40%. I got my 15% and became a full partner with a 25% stake. By then, I was living in a small apartment, driving an old Honda, but I had a growing business and, more importantly, access to market intelligence that was lethal to K&K. Jessica and Kyle, meanwhile, were living large. I kept tabs via social media, using a fake account. They traveled, bought a yacht, a questionable one, but nice, and Jessica opened her fitness studio with Kyle's money. She looked happy, and that pissed me off more than anything. I didn't want her to suffer. I wanted her to realize what a mistake her choice was. But for now, she was basking in his wealth. I decided to move gradually. I didn't want them to know it was me. Let them think it was a coincidence. I started small. Through my company, I had access to a database of small developers. I knew K&K often overcharged small clients because they couldn't negotiate. I started offering these developers an alternative, our materials, cheaper, with delivery. I wasn't dumping prices, I was just honest. I also hired a freelancer on Upwork to write a few articles for local business blogs about problems facing old players in the building materials market. No names, but hints that some companies were coasting on old contracts and neglecting quality. I planted seeds of doubt. But the main blow was coming. I found out that Kyle's father, old Mr. Kesselman, was seriously ill. Pancreatic cancer. He had about a year left. Kyle was set to inherit everything. But if the business started crumbling while the father was alive, the father might rewrite the will or sell the business. I needed to accelerate. I reached out to a major developer who had worked with K&K for 15 years. I knew their contract was up in 6 months. I offered them better terms using my business as a front. But I didn't just offer price. I said to the developer, I'd check K&K's financial stability if I were you. Word is they've got internal problems. You need a reliable partner for the next 5 years, not a company that might collapse. The developer, naturally, did due diligence. I don't know how deep they dug, but rumors about K&K's problems started spreading. Kyle panicked. He started scrambling, offering discounts, but it looked like desperation. Now it was time for Tom. I hired a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the most expensive corporate litigator in the city. I paid him a $50,000 retainer. That was almost all my savings at the time. But I knew if I went cheap, the lawyer would fold under pressure from Kyle's attorneys. I prepared the document package. Tom agreed to testify anonymously through my lawyer to avoid being dragged in as an accomplice. He claimed he wasn't part of the scheme, just saw the numbers. We filed a complaint with the state's Economic Crimes Unit and simultaneously filed a civil suit on behalf of a minority shareholder of K&K. I found an old guy who owned 1% of the stock, was unhappy with dividends, and let us act on his behalf. Hell broke loose. Kyle didn't know where the wind was coming from. He thought it was Tom and started pressuring Tom through mutual contacts. But Tom was ready. He said if anyone touched him, he'd give interviews to every local news channel. Kyle backed off. Kyle's father, sick, found out about the investigation. I can imagine the scene. The old man who'd spent 40 years building a business learning that his idiot son had not only been stealing but had left such obvious traces that there was now a criminal case. Kyle's father tried to bury it. He offered to pay back the money, fire the accountant, pretend it was a mistake. But the prosecutors were already interested. Plus, I made sure the story leaked to local business media. Headline: K and KVP suspected of embezzling $2.5 million. Kyle was suspended. Jessica deleted all the yacht photos. But I didn't stop. I needed him to lose everything he considered his. I remembered the house they bought. I knew it was owned by Kyle's corporation as a company asset. But the mortgage was paid with cash? No. I dug deeper. Turns out Kyle had used embezzled money to buy the house, then transferred ownership to Jessica to shield it from lawsuits. That was his mistake. I hired a private investigator. I wanted to find something that would discredit them personally. I knew Jessica wasn't a saint, but I needed something more. The PI discovered that Kyle, while with Jessica, had been seeing his ex-mistress. Yes, he'd had a mistress during his marriage to Stacy. Her name was Laura. She worked at one of the K&K stores. Kyle promised her a management position, but after the embezzlement scandal broke, he fired her to cover his tracks. Laura was furious. I contacted Laura. I told her who I was and what I wanted. She was hesitant at first, but when I said I had a lawyer who could help her get justice for the wrongful termination, she agreed. Laura provided text messages where Kyle referred to Jessica as a temporary project, said he took her from me because he could, and that she actually annoyed him with her stupidity. She also confirmed he used corporate funds for personal expenses, including gifts for her. I anonymously sent those screenshots to Jessica. I knew it was cruel. But I wanted her to see who she'd left me for. I wanted her to read how he called her a dumb bitch and a convenient hole in his texts to Laura. The reaction was immediate. 2 days later, Jessica posted a story that said, "Sometimes people show their true colors too late." She moved out. She went to her mother's. Kyle was alone, under investigation, without a girlfriend, without his job at the family company, with a crumbling reputation. Kyle's father died 4 months after the scandal broke. I don't know if the stress accelerated it, but it probably did. He died before he could fully transition the business. The company was left in limbo. Creditors, hearing about the embezzlement and investigation, called in their loans. K&K couldn't pay. Bankruptcy was declared 8 months later. The store chain was sold off in pieces. My company, now thriving, bought 3 of the most strategically important K&K warehouses at auction for pennies. Literally about 15% of their actual value. No one wanted assets from a company with that much scandal attached. Kyle lost everything. His stake in the company was worthless. His personal accounts were frozen by the civil suit. The house, titled to Jessica, she took, but it was mortgaged, and the bank repossessed it when Jessica couldn't make payments without Kyle's money. She ended up with nothing. Kyle was charged with 2 counts, fraud and money laundering. He took a plea deal to avoid prison. He confessed, paid back what was left, about $800,000, got probation and massive fines. But the key was he now had a felony record. With that, he could never hold an executive position in construction or finance again. 3 years have passed since the day I caught them in bed. I'm sitting in my office. My company is now one of the market leaders in our region. I have a new girlfriend, Sarah. She's an architect. We're planning to buy a house together. I didn't become a cynical bastard who hates all women. I just became careful. Yesterday, I got a Facebook message from Jessica. She sent a long message. Here it is, verbatim. "Mark, I know it was you. I know you destroyed Kyle's life. I'm not angry. I want to say that you were right. I made a huge mistake. I think every day about how we planned the wedding, how hard you tried. Kyle promised me the stars, but he turned out to be a narcissistic psychopath. I'm living with my mom now, working as an admin at a gym. The studio closed. I have nothing. I'd like to see you, just have coffee, talk. I need closure. Please." I read that message 5 times. I felt no anger, no joy, no pity. I remembered how she looked at me when I stood there on crutches. I remembered her words. You don't have the opportunities he does. I wrote back, Jessica, I got your message. You're right, it was me. I won't deny it. I spent 3 years getting my self-respect back, and along the way, I destroyed what you and Kyle built on my ruins. I'm not proud of it, but I don't regret it. I don't want to meet for coffee. Not because I'm angry, but because I have nothing to say to you. Your closure is your problem. I closed my chapter the day I bought the first K&K warehouse. I hope you find your way. But without me, Mark. She didn't reply. I'm writing this in my office. I opened a good bottle of whiskey that I bought on the anniversary of buying the warehouses. Across from me is a photo of my father. He always said, son, the best revenge is a life well lived. I think he meant something more zen than what I did. But I did what I could. Kyle, as far as I know, is now a manager at a gas station on the outskirts of town. He has a new girlfriend who, they say, doesn't know about his past. Maybe he's happy. Maybe not. I don't care. Jessica tried to friend my new girlfriend Sarah on social media. Sarah asked me who she was. I said, an ex who hurt me. Sarah blocked her. I don't feel satisfaction. I feel calm. And that's probably the best thing I could have gotten. Thanks for reading. If you have questions, ask. I'll be in the comments for the next day. Update 1, 4 hours later. A lot of you are asking how I feel now, years later. Honestly, sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, dreaming I'm back on crutches in the bedroom doorway. But then I turn over, see Sarah sleeping next to me, and it passes. Yes, I regret dragging Tom and Laura into it. Tom, I helped get a good job at my company. He's my financial controller now. Laura got a settlement and opened a small flower shop. I feel responsible to them. They were pawns in Kyle's game too. Update 2, 6 hours later. You're asking if Sarah knows the whole story. Yes, I told her everything on our third date. I said, I'm not a perfect person. I destroyed a guy's career and indirectly caused his sick father to die under stress. Sarah looked at me and said, you didn't destroy it. You just turned on the lights, and they scattered like roaches. I like that she uses metaphors, even though I asked for less of them in this story. She's smart. Update 3, 12 hours later. Someone asked about the $8,000 ring. I pawned it a month after the betrayal. Got $3,000. I used that to buy a suit for the interview at the trading company where I started my climb. So the ring paid off. The main takeaway. Never underestimate a quiet engineer with a cast on his leg and a broken heart. We have a lot of time to think about revenge plans while we're stuck at home on sick leave. Take care, everyone, and don't sleep with your friend's fiancé, especially if your friend knows how to count money and hold a grudge. Story 4. Hi everyone. My name is Leah. I'm 28. I work as a financial analyst at a large corporation in Boston. My already ex-husband, Caleb, is 32, an M&A attorney at a prestigious firm. We were together for 7 years, married for 5. We don't have children, and I now understand that this is probably the only mercy in this entire story. To understand the essence of what happened, you have to go back to the very beginning. Caleb was my first serious boyfriend. I grew up in a religious family in the suburbs, where I was taught that a man is the head of the family, and a woman's role is to be a reliable support system. I thought I was lucky to find a man like him. He was charismatic, ambitious, always knew what to say. He used to say I was his anchor that kept him from drifting away into an endless career race. Problems started, as they often do, not with a loud scandal, but with a quiet feeling that I was going crazy. 2 months ago, I was sitting in the kitchen checking the family budget. Caleb always had a casual attitude toward money, so I kept track. I noticed a strange transaction. A transfer of exactly $500 to a name, J. Whitmore. It didn't look like a utility bill or any of his usual subscriptions. I thought it might be a consultant's fee, but he always told me about his work. I asked him over dinner, hey, who's J. Whitmore? We transferred him $500. Caleb didn't even blink. He looked at me, froze for a moment, and said, it's insurance. Insurance for equipment at the office. I told you about it, you probably forgot. I don't forget things like that. I remember everything, but I brushed it off, calling myself paranoid. A week later, we were at a party hosted by his law partner, Marcus. I was talking to Marcus's wife, Stacy, who, after 2 glasses of rosé, became suspiciously candid. She said, Leah, you're so smart for convincing Caleb to buy that little house in Vermont. It's a genius investment. Marcus and I have been thinking about getting a weekend place too. I nearly choked on my wine. What house? I asked. Stacy looked embarrassed, thinking she'd said something she shouldn't, and quickly changed the subject, mumbling something about a surprise. A house in Vermont. I knew nothing about a house in Vermont, but details started clicking in my head. Over the past 6 months, Caleb had been going away every 2 or 3 weekends for business trips to New York. He said it was important negotiations with a major client. I believed him because he'd always bring back refrigerator magnets and funny stories about traffic. I didn't cause a scene. Instead, I started acting like a spy in my own marriage. I installed remote access software on my laptop, but Caleb was a lawyer and too smart to make dumb mistakes. He cleared his browser history, but he forgot about the iPad that stayed at home. His iMessages were synced to it. One morning, while he was in the shower, I opened the iPad. I found a conversation with a contact saved as K. Strong. I opened it, expecting to see a colleague. It was a woman. The messages weren't just flirting. It was a parallel universe. Sweetie, when are you coming this time? The house feels empty without you. Picked up our favorite steaks, waiting for you Friday. Caleb, am I imagining it, or did you transfer $500 less to the house account? We had a pipe burst and need to pay the plumber. J. Whitmore. It wasn't insurance. It was her. Her name was Julianne Whitmore. She was 35, the owner of a small contemporary art gallery in Brooklyn. I found that out in 2 hours while Caleb was drinking coffee and reading the news. I found her Instagram. There were photos of their house in Vermont, a renovated farmhouse with a huge porch. In one photo, there was Caleb's hand, wearing his wedding ring, which he apparently took off when he crossed the threshold. I recognized the watch I'd given him for our 3rd anniversary. The biggest blow was yet to come. Scrolling further through the messages, I found a conversation with his mother, Patricia. They were discussing me, but not the way I expected. Patricia wrote, "Are you sure you want to do this right now? Divorcing Leah is going to be expensive. You don't have a prenup, do you?" Caleb replied, "I'm laying the groundwork. I need her to want to leave on her own. That way I can minimize the damage. If she finds out about Julianne, she'll freak out and make mistakes. Then I can paint her as unstable. I have a plan." His mother answered, "She's a good girl, but you need a woman who fits your level, not just an accountant. Julianne understands art, business. Plus, she has connections." I wasn't just being cheated on. I was being coldly prepared for disposal. I wasn't a wife. I was a project that needed to be closed with minimal losses. 2 years of infidelity, buying a house with joint money I earned and saved, because I managed the budget, and a plan to destroy my reputation. I sat in the living room, the same one where we used to watch movies, and I had no tears left. Just a cold emptiness. You know that feeling when adrenaline pushes out all emotions? I didn't cry. I started making a plan. First, I had to prove that the house in Vermont was bought with marital assets. I found the statements. Caleb had transferred money from his account, but in Massachusetts, where we lived, all income during the marriage is considered joint. I hired a private investigator. Not a cheap one, but a serious guy recommended by an acquaintance who specialized in divorce cases. His name was Mike. Within 2 weeks, he gathered a dossier for me. Photos of Caleb and Julianne in Vermont, their shopping trips together. Testimony from neighbors who thought they were husband and wife. The neighbors thought she was Mrs. Caleb. Second, I started preparing the finances. I removed myself as a co-signer from a credit card we rarely used, leaving it solely in his name. I opened a separate bank account he didn't know about and transferred exactly half of what was in our joint savings. No more, no less. Exactly half, so he couldn't later say I stole from him. Third, I stopped being convenient. I stopped cooking dinners, stopped ironing his shirts. When he asked what was wrong, I said I was tired from work. He got annoyed, but I noticed he seemed almost pleased internally. He thought his plan to provoke me was working. He thought I was becoming the unstable wife he could leave with a clear conscience. The culmination was supposed to be his corporate anniversary party. It was a Great Gatsby-themed costume gala. Caleb expected me to go with him to show family unity. But I knew Julianne would be there too. He'd texted her himself, "Come, it'll be fun. Leah will sit in the corner like always. She won't suspect a thing." I decided this would be the perfect stage for exposure. A week before the party, I did something that in my head seemed brilliant, but in hindsight looks like the beginning of my downfall. I contacted Julianne. Not directly. I created a fake Instagram account pretending to be the assistant of a well-known New York gallerist who supposedly wanted to propose a collaboration to Julianne. I scheduled a meeting with her at the hotel bar where the party was taking place, an hour before the event started. I wrote, "My boss really wants to meet you in person before the main crowd. Come up to the lounge on the second floor at 6 p.m. She took the bait. Of course she did. She was hungry for career opportunities. On the day of the party, I dressed differently than usual. Instead of the modest dress Caleb would have chosen, I wore a floor-length crimson dress with a high slit. I did bold makeup. Caleb, seeing me, grimaced. "That's a bit flashy for a corporate event." I replied, "I just want to look nice for my husband." He shrugged. "Suit yourself. Don't drink too much." We arrived at the hotel. I pretended I'd left my clutch in the car and asked Caleb to wait for me in the lobby. He reluctantly agreed. I went up to the second floor. Julianne was already sitting in the lounge, sipping a martini, with her laptop ready, clearly expecting the agent from the gallery. She was beautiful, tall, stylish, with expensive jewelry. I walked up to her, sat down across from her, and smiled. I introduced myself. I told her my name. At first, she didn't understand. She asked, "Where's Linda?" the fake assistant's name. I replied, "Linda doesn't exist. It's just me, Leah, Caleb's wife." I watched her face go white. She started gasping for air, seemingly about to call security or run away. I said, "Don't make a scene. I'm not going to break glasses or pull your hair. I just need you to look at this." I pulled out the printouts. Bank statements showing Caleb withdrawing money for her house repairs. Copies of checks he'd signed. Photos the detective had taken. I laid it all out in front of her. "Did you know he was planning to throw me out?" I asked. She was silent, but I could see in her eyes that yes, she did. She'd been waiting for it. "He says he bought that house for us," she finally said defiantly. "That you two have been strangers for a long time." "Maybe," I said, "but the problem is, the house was bought with our money." "Mine too. Half of that house is mine. And if you don't want to end up in court as the mistress who helped a husband squander marital assets, I suggest you do something for me tonight." I laid out my plan. I wasn't asking her to betray Caleb. I was asking her to act rationally. I told her that if she asked him one specific question in public, in front of his partners, I would guarantee not to drag her into legal battles. Furthermore, I told her I knew about his plan to fire his junior partner, who was a friend of hers, but Caleb was keeping it a secret. I'd found that in the messages. I gave her information that was advantageous to her. She looked at me for a long time. Then she took her martini, drained it, and nodded. "What time should I go down?" I went down to the main hall. Caleb was already there, talking to partners. When he saw me, he exhaled in relief. Apparently, he'd been worried I'd freak out. I took a glass of champagne and stood off to the side, smiling at the right people. An hour later, Julianne appeared. She looked stunning in a black dress. Caleb tensed when he saw her. He looked at me, then at her. I pretended to be engrossed in conversation with some woman. Caleb walked over to Julianne, leaned close to her ear, clearly hissing, "What the hell are you doing here?" And then she said it. Loudly enough for Marcus and two other senior partners to hear. She said, with an innocent smile, "Honey, I just wanted to ask, have you told Leah yet that we're getting married as soon as you settle the asset division? Or should I tell her myself?" Silence. I don't know what was louder, the silence or the ringing of my own pulse. Caleb went pale. Marcus choked on his whiskey. I slowly turned to them, with the most surprised expression I could muster. I walked over to them. I looked at Julianne, then at Caleb. "What does she mean?" I asked calmly. "Who is this?" Caleb tried to grab my elbow. "Leah, she's a crazy client, she's out of her mind. Let's step outside." I pulled back. "No, wait. You tell me she's crazy, but she knows your name, she knows my name, and she's talking about a wedding?" My voice was trembling, but it wasn't hysterical. It was the voice of an insulted woman. I was playing my part. Julianne delivered the final blow. "Caleb, you promised everything would be settled tonight. I'm tired of being your secret. We have a house, we have plans. Stop lying to her." Caleb looked at me, at the partners, at her. He was trapped. The lawyer who'd been setting a trap for me had fallen into his own. I didn't scream. I did the thing that would be most humiliating for him. Quietly, through tears, which were real this time, because the adrenaline was gone and the pain hit me, I said, "You bought a house with our money? You were planning a wedding with her while I thought we were a family? Caleb, how could you?" And I left. I didn't run out. I walked out with my head held high. I got a cab and went home. That night, my phone exploded. His mother called. His friends called. But I didn't answer anyone. The next morning, I hired the most ruthless divorce attorney in Boston I could find. Her name was Marilyn Cohen, and the legend was that she made men pay for the air their wives breathed during the marriage. I filed for divorce first. I attached all the evidence to the petition. The detective's dossier, bank statements, screenshots of messages where Caleb discussed with his mother how to paint me as unstable. Caleb was furious. He stormed home. Yes, we were still living together because I refused to leave. He screamed that I'd staged a spectacle, that I was worse than he thought, that I was a manipulative bitch. I listened to him, standing in the kitchen doorway. When he finished, I asked, "What about the house in Vermont, bought with my money? Is that not manipulation? Your mother discussing how to best screw me over, is that not a spectacle? Did you fuck her in our bed while I was on a business trip?" I'd found proof of that too, when I dug deeper. He went silent. His face twisted. He realized I knew everything. He left that night to stay with his mother. Then began the hell of court hearings. Marilyn was ruthless. She filed a motion to value all assets, including the Vermont house acquired during the marriage but deliberately concealed from one spouse. The judge was a woman. She didn't appreciate that a lawyer, Caleb, knowing the law, had tried to hide assets and devise a plan to gaslight his spouse. In the end, I got more than I expected. I got 60% of our total assets, including half the value of the Vermont house. Caleb either had to buy out my share or sell the house. Julianne, who had apparently invested her own money in the renovation, ended up being the loser. Her lover lost a ton of money in the divorce. On top of that, a scandal erupted at Caleb's firm. Partners don't like it when their M&A lawyers can't resolve a conflict in their own family without public embarrassment. He was passed over for a promotion. Marcus, who'd witnessed the scene, started avoiding him. It seemed like a happy ending. Revenge was served. I sat in my new one-bedroom apartment downtown, looking at the money in my account, and I felt emptiness. But as you can guess, the story doesn't end there. Because the title of this post hints that I might have gone too far. A month after the divorce, I ran into Julianne by chance. It wasn't intentional. I was in New York for work, stopped at a coffee shop, and she was sitting there with a friend. When she saw me, she went pale, but didn't run away. Her friend stepped away, and Julianne approached me. "You planned it all, didn't you?" she asked. "That meeting, the party, everything." I was defending myself, I said. "You ruined his career, and my reputation in certain circles." She looked tired. "He dumped me a week after the divorce. Said I betrayed his trust." Can you imagine the irony? I didn't know what to say. I felt strange. Not like a winner, but like a participant in a dirty fight. "He's not who he seems," she added. "Be careful." I asked what she meant, but she just walked away. I didn't think much of it at the time. Until last Friday. My best friend, Chloe, who I've known since high school, invited me to dinner. Chloe works in the same building as I do, just a floor above. She said she wanted to introduce me to a new colleague. I went to the restaurant, thinking it would be a regular evening. At the table sat a man. Dark-haired, with a bit of stubble, wearing a nice suit but no tie. Chloe introduced him as Ethan. Ethan stood up, smiled, and something inside me stirred. Not just because he was handsome, though he was, but because there was something familiar about his smile. A strange warmth. Dinner went great. He worked at an investment fund, was smart, witty, and most importantly, he listened. Caleb never listened. Ethan asked questions, remembered details. When I mentioned I liked a certain wine, he ordered a bottle within minutes. At the end of the evening, he walked me to my car. We exchanged numbers. I drove home feeling something I thought was dead inside me stirring back to life. Hope? We started dating. Slowly, cautiously. Ethan knew about my divorce, knew I'd been through hell. He was patient. No pressure. We went to movies, walked along the waterfront. After a month, I invited him to my place for the first time. We were watching a movie, lying on the couch. I brought drinks, and he was browsing the books on my shelf. He picked up an old detective novel I'd bought at a sale. A bookmark fell out. It was a photo. Our wedding photo, me and Caleb. I'd just forgotten to put it away. I flinched to grab it, but Ethan got there first. His face changed. He didn't say, "Oh, that's your ex?" He said, "You were married to Caleb McCarthy?" I tensed. "Do you know him?" "I know him," Ethan said, his voice hardening. "I know him very well." He got off the couch, paced the room. I sat there, feeling a coldness spreading in my chest. "Another secret. Leah," he said, "I need to tell you something. And it might change everything between us. I didn't mean to use you. I had no idea you were that Leah when Chloe invited me to dinner. She just said her friend had been through a rough divorce and needed to get out. But when I found out your last name a couple of days after we met, I should have told you, but I was afraid you'd run." "Who are you, Ethan?" I asked. "Caleb and I went to college together. We were in the same fraternity. He was my mentor freshman year." Ethan paused. "And sophomore year, he slept with my girlfriend. The girl I'd been with for 2 years. Afterwards, I found out he'd done it before. He collected his friends' girlfriends. It wasn't just sex, it was a game. He'd find what was precious to someone and take it. My girlfriend left me for him. Then, 6 months later, he dumped her because he was bored. I dropped out of college, transferred to another university. I lost my scholarship because my emotional state tanked and I failed my exams. It took me 5 years to get my life back. And I swore that if I ever saw his name again, I'd—" He trailed off. I sat there, looking at Ethan. Events began to form a new, more terrifying mosaic. "You're saying he specifically targeted women who were important to his circle?" I asked. "Yes. For him, it was sport. And then it hit me. My relationship with Caleb. I was a shy, religious girl. My only close male friend in college was a guy named Cole. We weren't dating, but we were very close. Cole was my support system. Then Caleb appeared out of nowhere, started pursuing me, pushed Cole aside. Cole got hurt, we stopped talking. Caleb said then, he's just jealous, but he's not good enough for you." I believed him. I found Cole on Facebook. I messaged him. He replied quickly. We met the next day. Cole looked older than his years. He told me that before Caleb started dating me, he'd gone to Cole and said, word for word, "You're too soft for her. You can't give her what I can. Step aside before you get hurt." Cole tried to fight back, but Caleb started spreading rumors about him, turning mutual friends against him. Cole just gave up and moved out of state. Caleb hadn't just cheated on me. He had systematically destroyed my support system to isolate me and make me convenient. And then, when he was done with me, he decided to discard me as cynically as he had all the others. I got angry. No, I fell into a cold, calculating rage, just like I'd had at the party. Ethan watched me with concern. He said he was sorry he hadn't told me sooner, and that he didn't want me to think he was using me to get revenge. But it was too late. A new plan was forming in my head. I told Ethan, I want him to lose everything. Not just money. Everything. Ethan tried to talk me out of it. He said, Leah, look at yourself. You've already won. Don't let him drag you back into this swamp. Revenge doesn't bring happiness. But I wasn't listening. I was thinking about the years stolen from me. About how I could have been happy with Cole or someone else who didn't see me as a project. I started digging deeper. I hired the same detective, Mike, but now I asked him to dig into Caleb's past. Connections, deals, anything that might be dirty. And Mike found something. It turned out there had been an internal investigation at his firm 2 years ago. Caleb was representing a major client in a merger, and one of the subcontractor companies accused him of losing documents that were unfavorable to his client but highly favorable to the other side. The investigation was buried because the client was happy, but a junior associate who tried to raise the alarm was fired. That associate's name was Brian. I found Brian. He was now working at a small firm in New Jersey. I called him. I said I was the ex-wife of Caleb McCarthy, and I had questions about the Stonebridge Industries case. That was the name of the deal. Brian was tense, but his desire for justice won out. He told me that Caleb had deliberately concealed documents showing that the company being acquired had debts not reflected in the financial statements. He'd helped his client deceive the shareholders of the acquiring company. The deal went through, and shareholders lost millions. Brian filed a complaint with the senior partner, but was forced to keep quiet, threatened with losing his own license. I realized I had my ace. I didn't have direct evidence, but I had a witness. And I knew that if this information reached the Bar Association and the IRS, Caleb was finished. Not just losing his job, but losing his license. Possibly facing criminal charges. I compiled the dossier. I was ready to send it. But the day before, something happened that stopped me. I went to visit my mom. She lives in the suburbs where I grew up. She hadn't approved of my divorce, thought I should have saved the marriage, but she just stayed quiet now. When I arrived, her friend, Aunt Martha, was visiting. They were having tea. I sat with them. The conversation turned to Caleb. I started telling them what I'd found out, what I was planning. I expected my mom to be shocked. Instead, she went pale and said, "Leah, stop. Mom, he destroyed my life. He's a manipulator." "I know," she said. "I know he's a manipulator." I fell silent. "What do you mean, you know?" She lowered her eyes. Aunt Martha, who had always been like a second mother, took her hand. "Leah," my mom began, "I have to tell you something. Something I've hidden for 10 years. It turned out that Caleb had hired my mother. Not literally employed her, but he paid her. All those years. When we first started dating, he went to my mother and said, 'I know you're having money problems. I know you owe the bank a large sum on the house. I'll pay it all off, but with one condition. You'll be my ally. You'll convince Leah I'm the perfect man. You'll talk her out of fighting with me. You'll tell her that her husband is the head of the family and her role is to obey.' My mother, who had spent my whole life preaching about a woman's duty to her husband, that divorce was a sin, wasn't doing it just because of her beliefs. She was doing it because Caleb had her on a leash. He transferred money to her monthly, which she used for my father's medications. He had cancer and died 3 years ago, and to pay off the mortgage. She was in a deep hole, and he knew it. I wanted to tell you," my mother cried. "When he started cheating, I wanted to, but I was afraid he'd stop paying for your father's treatment. Then your father died, and I didn't know how to confess. I was ashamed. I betrayed you." I looked at her, my own mother, who had sold me out. Not for $1 million. For a mortgage and medication. I understood her desperation, but something inside me broke. I didn't just feel like a discarded wife. I felt like a commodity that everyone around me had been trading. I left my mother without saying a word. I sat in my car in the parking lot and cried harder than I had even on the day of the divorce. Then I stopped crying, and I decided I was going to do it anyway. I would destroy him. I would send all the documents to the Bar Association, the IRS, his firm. I wanted him on the street, without a license, without money, without a reputation. I went home. Ethan was waiting for me. He knew I'd been to my mom's but not the details. I told him everything. About my mom, the money, how Caleb had systematically cut me off from anyone who could protect me. Ethan listened. Then he said a sentence that made me stop and think. "Leah, you're describing a plan for revenge that would strip him of his livelihood. That's serious. Are you sure it will make you happy? Because if you send those documents, you become the one who destroyed someone's life. Yes, he might deserve it. But will it make you feel better? Or are you just trying to cause him the same pain he caused you?" I replied, "Yes, I want that. I want him to suffer." Ethan shook his head. Then, "Sorry, but I can't be around for that. I can't watch you turn into him." He also acted out of a desire to control and destroy. "If you do this, you'll sink to his level." I snapped. "You have no right to judge me. You don't know what I've been through." "I do," he said quietly. "Because he did the same thing to me. But I didn't seek revenge. I walked away. I built a new life. I chose myself, not a war with him. If you choose war, you'll always be tied to him. You'll think about him every day, checking if your plan worked, rejoicing in his failures. He'll still be occupying space in your head. Is that what you want?" I didn't sleep that night. I sat with the folder of documents. On my desk were Brian's testimony, bank statements, the detective's dossier. One click of the mouse, and Caleb McCarthy's life would be in ruins. At 3 a.m., I called Chloe. She answered on the second ring, even though she usually sleeps like a log. "Chloe," I said, "what do I do?" I told her everything. About my mom, Ethan, the documents. Chloe was silent for about 5 minutes. Then she said, "Leah, I love you like a sister. And I'm going to tell you what you don't want to hear. Ethan is right. You've already won. You left the marriage with money, with dignity, with proof of his lies. His entire circle knows he's a cheater and a manipulator. His career has already suffered. If you report him for financial fraud, you won't be a hero. You'll be the ex-wife who tried to put her husband in prison out of spite. Even if it's true, people will look at you sideways. Will you lose your job? No, but you'll lose yourself. What about justice? I asked. He defrauded shareholders, he ruined Brian's career. Justice isn't your job. You're not a cop, you're not a prosecutor. If you think the information is important, you can send it to the Bar Association anonymously. But not in your name. Give it to Brian. Let him decide what to do. It's his life, his career that was destroyed. And you focus on your own life. I looked at the folder. I picked it up, and the next day, I drove to New Jersey to see Brian. I handed him all the documents. I said, I don't want to be involved in this anymore. This is the information about how Caleb set you up and defrauded investors. Do what you want with it. I don't know you. I never saw you. Brian looked at the folder like it was the Holy Grail. His hands were shaking. He said, I've waited 5 years for this. Thank you. I left. I don't know what Brian did. I don't want to know. I deleted the detective's number. I blocked everyone connected to that life. I told Ethan I wasn't going to seek revenge. We talked again. He was cautious, but he stayed. A month passed. I stopped checking Caleb's social media. I stopped thinking about what he was doing. I started seeing a therapist because I realized my desire for revenge was a symptom of not having processed the loss of control over my life. My therapist helped me understand that I'd been passive my whole life. First with my mother, then with Caleb. My revenge was an attempt to regain control, but by destroying someone else. It wasn't healthy. I'm not speaking to my mother. I sent her a long email explaining that I understood her desperation, but I couldn't forgive her yet. That she chose money over me, and there are consequences. She sent me a tearful message full of justifications, but I didn't reply. I need time. Maybe a year. Maybe 10. Or maybe never. Julianne, strangely enough, came out of this story the best. I heard through the grapevine that she ended things with Caleb for good, opened a new gallery in Soho, and is reportedly dating some architect. I don't feel hatred toward her. She was just as much a pawn as I was, just on the other side. Ethan and we're still together. But it's complicated. Sometimes he looks at me with a question in his eyes. Will I fall back into that rage? I'm trying to be softer. I'm learning to trust. It's hard when you've been betrayed by everyone, including your mother. But he's patient. And now, the strangest part. This morning, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was just a postcard with a view of Vermont. On the back, it said, I know it was you. You thought you got away clean? Thanks for the gift. I'm just starting to return the favor. The handwriting was Caleb's. My heart dropped. I flipped the postcard over. Nothing else. I checked the envelope. Nothing. I don't know what it means. A threat? Does he know I gave the documents to Brian? If Brian filed a complaint, Caleb would have received notification by now. Maybe he just suspects. Or maybe it's an attempt to scare me. I called Ethan. He told me not to panic and came over. We went to the police together. The officer said without a direct threat, they couldn't do much, but advised me to start a file in case there was more. I'm sitting here now, writing this text. I feel fear. The same cold I felt when I first found out about Julianne. But now I'm not afraid for my marriage. I'm afraid for my safety. I don't know what Caleb is planning. He's a lawyer. He knows how to work within the system to make someone's life miserable. He could sue me for defamation? Spread rumors at my work? Contact my mother again? I thought I was out of the game. I thought by giving up revenge, I'd found peace. But Caleb doesn't seem ready to stop. I'm scared, and I'm ashamed, because part of me, that dark part that wanted to destroy him, is whispering, you should have finished it. You should have sent those documents yourself. You should have drowned him when you had the chance. But another part, the one that sees a therapist and tries to breathe steadily, says, you did the right thing. You're not a killer. You're a victim choosing to live. I don't know how it will end. Maybe it's just an empty threat. Maybe it's the start of a new war. Thank you for listening. I needed to get this out. Update 1, 2 days later. I hired a lawyer. Not Marilyn, she does divorces, not criminal cases, but a good guy named David who specializes in harassment defense. He advised me not to react to the postcard for now, but to start collecting evidence of any contact. I also installed a camera at my front door. I called Brian. He said he did file a complaint with the Massachusetts Bar Association, but the process could take up to a year. Caleb hasn't been formally charged yet, but he has been called in for testimony. That explains his anger. My former father-in-law, Caleb's dad, who I always got along with, called me today. He's been divorced from Patricia for years and lives in Florida. He said he'd heard about what's going on and wanted to warn me. He said, "Leah, Caleb doesn't lose. He's never lost. If he feels like he's losing, he becomes dangerous. When he was a teenager, he set fire to the car of a guy who beat him at tennis. It was never proven, but everyone knew. Be careful." I asked why he hadn't told me about his son's character earlier. He said he'd hoped Caleb had changed. That I was his chance. But apparently not. Ethan is with me now. He moved his things into my place temporarily so I wouldn't be alone. I feel safe when he's around, but when he goes to work, I check the locks 10 times. I don't know what to expect. Maybe nothing. Maybe he just wants me to live in fear. If so, it's working. I'll keep you posted if anything happens. Update 2, 3 weeks later. Something happened. Nothing physical. Nothing provable. But my career is under threat. An internal investigation started at my company. Someone anonymously reported to the compliance department that I had used my position to gain unauthorized access to bank accounts. I work in finance and have access to data, but I've never used it for personal purposes. The accusation was false, but the investigation was stressful. I was called in for a 2-hour interview. I provided access logs showing I'd never entered the systems without a work-related need. I was cleared, but the stink remains. My boss looked at me with suspicion. Then, my car was keyed in the supermarket parking lot. No cameras there. The police said it was vandalism. Then, Ethan received an anonymous letter at his office saying he was dating a woman who suffers from a mental disorder and is prone to stalking. Attached was a printout of an old post of mine, not this one, but an emotional Facebook post from the first week after the divorce where I was venting about the infidelity. Ethan showed it to his boss. Fortunately, his boss was reasonable and said it was a personal matter unrelated to work. I know it's Caleb. I can't prove it, but I know. I went to David with this news. He said we could file a harassment report, but without direct evidence, it's difficult. He advised me to change my phone number, delete all public social media accounts, and temporarily move. I decided to leave, not out of fear, but out of common sense. My company approved remote work for a month. Ethan can't leave for long because of his job, but I told him I needed some time alone, away from all of this. I left for Vermont. No, not that house. I rented a small cabin on a lake on the other side of the state. I've been here for 3 days. It's quiet. I walk, drink coffee on the porch, watch the water. I've turned off my phone, keeping only one number for Ethan and my lawyer. I think about what's happened over these months. I think about who I was and who I've become. I think about my mother, Caleb, Julianne, Ethan. I think about how my desire for revenge nearly turned me into a monster. And I think that maybe the only way to beat Caleb is to stop playing his game. He wants a reaction. He wants me to be scared, angry, fighting. If I leave, if I stop reacting, he'll lose interest. I don't know if I'll go back to Boston. Maybe I should start a new life somewhere else. I have money, I have a profession. I don't need Boston. I don't need that apartment where everything reminds me of the war. I wrote Ethan a long letter. I told him I need time. That I don't want him to feel obligated to protect me. That I need to learn to stand on my own 2 feet. I love him, but I need to love myself first, not as a victim, not as an avenger, but as just Leah. He replied that he'll wait. As long as it takes. I don't know what comes next. Maybe I'll go back. Maybe not. Maybe Caleb will calm down. Maybe the bar association will disbar him. Maybe one day I can forgive my mother. But one thing I know for sure. I don't want to be the one planning revenge anymore. I want to be the one planning a life. Thank you for being with me. If there are new developments, I'll update. If not, it means I've found my peace. Final update, 6 months later. I'm sitting on the porch of my new house. Not in Vermont. I moved to Maine, bought a small house right by the ocean. I work remotely for the same company, but transferred to a division based in Portland. I'm no longer in Boston. Caleb, he was disbarred. Brian followed through. It turned out I wasn't the only one who provided information. After Brian filed his complaint, 2 former clients came forward confirming that Caleb had engaged in questionable schemes. He was fired from his firm. Now, as far as I know, he works as a consultant at some small shop in New Jersey, far from the Boston elite. Julianne, whom he tried to reconcile with, sued him for the money she'd put into the renovation of the house. She won, because she had receipts. Caleb's mother, Patricia, practically cursed me out in the local paper, but that doesn't matter anymore. My mother, it's complicated. She came to visit me in Maine a month ago. We sat in the kitchen, had tea, and she cried. I listened. I haven't forgiven her, but I've stopped being angry. I told her we need to build a new relationship, at a distance, without financial dependence. She agreed. We talk every 2 weeks. That's all I can do for now. Ethan comes to see me every weekend. We're not rushing things. I told him I'm not ready to live together until I've fully learned to trust again. He's patient. He's turned out to be exactly who I needed, not a savior, but a support. The postcard from Caleb was the last thing. Nothing else happened. I think when he lost his license, he didn't have time for games anymore. Sometimes I think about the girl who sat in the living room with an iPad, reading messages about betrayal. I feel sorry for her. But I'm proud of who she became. She didn't become an avenger. She didn't stay a victim. She just left. Thank you to everyone who supported me. If you're reading this and you're in a similar situation, don't plan revenge. Plan your exit. Revenge burns your soul, but leaving sets you free. Story 5. Hi Reddit. My name is Jake, I'm 34. When the main events happened, I was 32. My ex-wife's name is Chloe. We were both 30 when we got married. We met in college, dated for 4 years, were married for 6. That's 10 years together. I'm a structural engineer, she worked at a large medical equipment company. Her title was Business Development Manager. Sounds fancy, but basically she was a super salesperson. She was always ambitious, beautiful, with an incredible sense of style. I was proud of her. We lived in the suburbs of Austin, Texas. We had a house that we bought a year before the wedding and renovated ourselves. We didn't have kids. That's important. Chloe always said, career first, then house, then kids. I agreed. By the time we were 30, I was a senior engineer at my firm, and Chloe had been promoted to regional director of sales. She managed 12 people and oversaw a huge account, a network of private clinics. Problems started when they hired a new vice president of sales for her division. His name was Liam. Liam was 38, came from California, divorced, no kids, with perfect hair and teeth that probably glowed in the dark. A typical, corporate predator. Chloe started talking about him about 6 months before everything fell apart. At first, she was enthusiastic. He's so smart, his approach to negotiations is incredible, he's really teaching me things. Then with a hint of annoyance, he's too demanding, makes us work at night. Then the annoyance disappeared, and she started talking about him neutrally. That should have been a red flag for me. When your wife stops complaining about a male coworker and starts talking about him dryly, it means she's crossed a line where complaining is no longer appropriate because things have gotten too personal. I'm not an idiot. I noticed she started staying late more often. Not an hour, but 2 or 3. She'd come home smelling of expensive men's cologne that I didn't wear. When I asked, "Whose cologne are you wearing?" she said, "Oh, we were testing a new line of samples for corporate clients. Terrible chemicals, right?" I believed her, because I wanted to believe. The first blow came on our 6th wedding anniversary. I booked a table at a restaurant, bought her emerald earrings, her favorite stone. An hour before we were supposed to leave, she said, "Jake, I'm so sorry, we're swamped. Liam needs me to urgently redo a presentation for investors. I'll just be an hour, then I'll come. Wait for me." I waited. I sat in my suit, staring at the cake I'd baked myself. Yes, I bake. It's my hobby, and waited. At 11 p.m., I called. She didn't pick up. At midnight, I texted, "Everything okay?" She replied, "Yes, I'm driving, the presentation was complicated, don't wait up, go to bed." She came home at 1 a.m. I pretended to be asleep. She went into the bathroom, and I heard her turn the water on full blast and wash something. I quietly got up and checked the laundry basket. Her underwear, a set I'd never seen before. Expensive, lacy, black. She never wore anything like that to work. We were both in the comfortable cotton category for the office. And it was damp or something. Or was I imagining it? I didn't cause a scene. I told myself I was being paranoid. The next 2 weeks, I lived like I was on a powder keg. I started noticing details. She started placing her phone screen down. Before, we didn't have passwords from each other. We both knew each other's codes. Suddenly, her phone password changed. When I asked, she said, "Oh, corporate policy, we have to use a complex password for email now," and it applied to the whole device. It sounded plausible. Then there was a business trip. A 3-day conference in Dallas. She said she was going with Liam and 2 other colleagues. I asked, "Why are you driving instead of flying? It's a 3-hour drive." She replied, "Liam wants to discuss strategy on the way. It's inconvenient on a plane." They left Thursday morning. They were supposed to return Sunday evening. On Saturday evening, I was feeling lonely and decided to surprise her, drive to Dallas, book a nice hotel, and meet her after the conference. I wanted to reconnect. I knew the name of the hotel where they were staying because she'd told me. I helped choose it. I had a corporate code there. I arrived at 9 p.m. I went to the front desk, gave Chloe's last name, and the clerk said she was registered, but her key wasn't activated because the room was booked under Mr. Liam Morrison and Mrs. Chloe Stonewall. I repeated, "Mrs.?" The clerk gave me a strange look and said, "Yes, sir, they requested a queen bed, but we only had a king in the suite, so they took it." I'm not crazy. I didn't knock on the door. I sat in the lobby and waited for 2 hours. I saw them get out of the elevator. Liam was in a shirt with the top buttons undone. Chloe was wearing the dress she'd taken as her evening for dinner with partners. But her hair was a mess, and her makeup, well, you know. They were laughing, holding hands. I stood up. I saw them. Chloe smiled at me first, as if she was happy to see a nice surprise, and then it hit her. Her face froze. Liam pulled his hand away and stepped back. I said, "Hey, honey. Did you get the strategy figured out?" Chloe started stammering something about, "It's not what you think." I said, "Chloe, I just watched you walk out of the elevator with your lover. Don't insult my intelligence." I turned around and left. She ran after me. Liam stood there like a statue. I got in my car. She tried to open the door, but I locked it. She was yelling something about a mistake, and one time. I drove off. I cried the whole way to Austin. I'm not ashamed of it. I drove for 3 hours and sobbed. At home, I drank the whiskey we'd been saving for special occasions and texted my best friend Marcus. "She's sleeping with Liam." Marcus called back in 30 seconds and said, "I'm coming over, don't do anything stupid." The hell began, but I didn't know then that it was just the beginning. The real hell was waiting for me. Chloe came back Sunday evening, as planned. I was waiting for her in the kitchen. I was calm because everything inside me had already turned to stone. She walked in, crying, and started her monologue. "Jake, this meant nothing. It was just work, stress, you've been working so much lately, I felt lonely. Liam was just there. I love you. It was just sex, that's all. I'll quit, I'll never see him again." Classic. I listened and looked at her. I asked, "How many times?" She said, "What?" I said, "How many times has this happened? Not just in Dallas. How many times?" She was quiet, then said, "A few times. Over the last 2 months." I asked, "In our house?" She said, "No, never." I didn't believe her, but I didn't have proof. I told her I wanted a divorce. She fell to her knees. Literally. Grabbed my jeans and started sobbing. I pulled away. I said, "I'm filing the paperwork on Monday. I don't want to talk to you. Stay in the guest room for now." I went into our bedroom and locked the door. On Monday, I took the day off and went to a lawyer. My lawyer is Susan, a woman in her 60s with a face that's seen so many divorces nothing surprises her anymore. I told her everything. She said, "Jake, Texas is a community property state. But infidelity can affect asset division if you can prove she spent marital funds on the lover. Do you have any evidence of that?" I didn't. I just started gathering info. I went home, and that's when things got weird. Chloe suddenly stopped crying and begging for forgiveness. She became quiet, thoughtful. She started acting like I was sick and she was a caring nurse. She made me breakfast, left notes with little hearts. I didn't fall for it. I said, "Chloe, stop. We're getting a divorce." That's when she first looked at me with a cold glint and said, "Jake, think carefully. Divorce is expensive, and I'm not just walking away from this house." That was a warning. I didn't understand it. About a week after I hired the lawyer, Chloe had a nervous breakdown. I came home from work, and she was sitting on the floor in the living room, papers scattered around, sobbing, shaking. Stupidly, I asked, "What's wrong?" She said she'd been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. She said she'd been seeing a therapist, that I supposedly forced her to see because of the affair, though I never made her go, and the therapist said she had deep trauma from my emotional abuse and threats. I was shocked. I asked, "What emotional abuse? What threats?" She said, "You constantly controlled me, you stalked me, you came to Dallas to spy on me, you threatened to physically harm me if I talked to my colleagues." I said, "Chloe, that's a lie. I came to surprise you." I've never laid a finger on you." She looked at me and said a phrase that made my blood run cold. "It's your word against mine." "But I have records from the therapist, I have witness statements." Liam, it turned out, was willing to confirm that I supposedly threatened Chloe on the phone, and I'll file for a protective order if you don't stop. This was checkmate? No, this was blackmail. She decided that if she played the victim of domestic abuse, the court would side with her, and she'd get the house, alimony, despite the fact that she earned more than me? Yes, believe it or not, she earned more, about $180,000 a year. I made $140,000. And maybe even my share of my business, because I was a sole proprietor with a small construction firm. I realized I wasn't dealing with a woman who made a mistake. I was dealing with a calculated opponent ready to destroy me to keep her image in the house. I went back to Susan and told her about the PTSD and the protective order threat. Susan said, "Jake, this is an old tactic. They call the police, say they're scared, and the guy gets kicked out. If she files for an order, you'll be removed from your own house within 24 hours, and you won't be able to go near her. While the investigation goes on, you'll be crashing on someone's couch, and she'll be in the house. We need to get ahead of this." I asked, "How?" Susan said, "We file for divorce first. Today, we cite infidelity as the reason. And we need solid proof that she's threatening false accusations. Do you have recordings of any conversations?" At that moment, I remembered that Texas is a one-party consent state. I could record our conversations without her knowledge. I started recording everything, every conversation, and that's when I got lucky. Chloe, apparently, was used to me being the nice, easygoing Jake who believed everything she said. She didn't expect me to start playing by her rules. One evening, she started talking again about her condition. I asked her, "Chloe, are you seriously going to tell the court that I beat you?" She sighed and said, "Jake, I'm not saying you hit me. I'm saying you created an atmosphere of fear. You controlled my finances, you monitored my phone, you threatened Liam with violence. I have witnesses." I said, "What finances?" "We have a joint account, you spent $2,000 a month on clothes." I never said a word. She said, "That's called financial abuse. My therapist said so." I then asked, "If I took all the money out of our account, would that be abuse too?" She smirked, "Try it. The court will freeze the accounts as soon as I file for the order. I've already talked to a lawyer." Right there, she slipped up. She said, "I've already talked to a lawyer." It was clear as day on the recording. So, she had a lawyer preparing the groundwork for false accusations. I sent the recording to Susan. Susan said, "This is gold. But we need more. We need proof of the affair that can't be disputed. And we need something that discredits her claims of abuse." I started digging deeper. I hired a private investigator. Not because I wanted to stalk her, but because I needed facts. The pie was Gus, a former cop. I told him, "Gus, I need to know if she's still seeing Liam now, while we're still living under the same roof, and if there's anything tying her to him besides work." Gus took a $5,000 retainer and got to work. While Gus was working, I was living in hell. Chloe kept up the victim act. She'd cry on the phone with her friends loud enough for me to hear. "He's completely unsupportive, he's a psychopath, I'm scared for my life." She started hiding the kitchen knives, then told my mother, who, by the way, was on my side, but Chloe tried to win her over too, that she was hiding the knives because she was afraid I might grab them in a fit of rage. My mother is a nurse with 40 years of experience. She told Chloe, "Honey, Jake has been afraid of the sight of blood since he was 5. He can't even clean a fish. If you're going to lie about him, come up with something more believable." After that conversation, Chloe threw a tantrum and called my mother an accomplice to abuse. I realized I needed to get out of that house before she did something even more serious. I rented an apartment in a neighboring area and moved out. She stayed in the house. I told her, "The house will be sold, the money split. I'm not paying the mortgage alone." She said, "You will pay while the divorce is pending, or I'll tell the court you abandoned me without means of support." I paid. Susan said it would look better for my reputation in court. 2 months passed. Gus came back with the results. And that's where the most surreal twist began. Gus found out that Liam wasn't just a boss. He'd been married but divorced a year before moving to Texas. The reason for the divorce? His ex-wife sued him for financial fraud. He'd used corporate funds for personal expenses, including renting an apartment for a mistress. He'd been fired from his previous company but hid it on his resume. At the new company, he was still on probation. Gus also found out that Chloe and Liam hadn't stopped seeing each other. They were renting an apartment in downtown Austin under a shell company. Gus got photos of them going into the apartment together, leaving at different times, kissing in the parking lot. Moreover, Gus found out that Chloe had transferred $15,000 from her personal account, opened without my knowledge, under her maiden name, to that shell company's account. That money was part of our joint income because she'd been transferring it from our joint account in small amounts, disguising it as bill payments and gifts. But that wasn't all. The juiciest part was yet to come. Gus found Liam's ex-wife. Her name was Vanessa. She lived in San Diego. I contacted her through Gus. Vanessa turned out to be a woman who hated Liam with a burning passion. She told me that Liam specialized in getting close to women in long-term relationships, destroying their marriages, and then using them for his financial schemes. She said, he's not just a cheater. He's a narcissist and a con artist. With Chloe, he's likely playing the long game. He'll convince her to transfer assets to him, then dump her. He did it to the girl before me. I asked Vanessa if she'd be willing to testify in court. She said, I'll testify under oath for free. I want that bastard to lose everything. Now I had leverage. 1. The recording of Chloe threatening false accusations. 2. Proof of the affair, photos, the rented apartment. 3. Proof of misusing marital funds for the lover. 4. A witness who could characterize Liam as a professional homewrecker and con artist. I thought the case would be quick and I'd get justice. But Chloe wouldn't be Chloe if she'd given up. She filed a countersuit. In it, she demanded the house in its entirety, claiming I'd threatened her and she couldn't live safely if we split assets, alimony for her support, despite her income, a restraining order preventing me from being around her future children. Though we had no kids, this was for the future, and, the most insane part, compensation for emotional distress due to systematic psychological abuse, in the amount of $500,000. She attached a letter from her therapist stating she had been diagnosed with complex PTSD caused by her husband's actions and was on the verge of suicide. The therapist, it later turned out, was friendly with Chloe's lawyer. They often provided such reports for a fee. I was furious. But Susan said, Jake, don't be mad. She's digging her own grave. Every lie she puts in those documents is perjury. When we prove it, the judge will destroy her. Our judge was Judge Morrison. An older man, a former military officer, known for having no tolerance for manipulation in his courtroom. At the preliminary hearing to decide temporary measures, who stays in the house, who pays, Chloe came with her lawyer, who specialized in women's issues, domestic violence cases. Her lawyer, David, started playing the sympathy card. My client is forced to live in a house that reminds her of years of abuse. She can't sleep, she's on antidepressants, she's lost 10 kilograms. Then Susan spoke. She said, Your Honor, the plaintiff, Chloe, claims in her suit that my client, Jake Stonewall, committed acts of physical and psychological abuse. However, we have evidence that these accusations are part of a strategy to gain an unfair advantage in asset division after the plaintiff was caught committing adultery. The judge raised an eyebrow. David objected, saying the affair had nothing to do with the abuse case. The judge said, Mr. Davis, if there's evidence that the abuse allegations were made to cover up an affair and influence asset division, that is directly relevant. I'd like to hear what Mr. Stonewall has. Susan played the recording where Chloe said, I've already talked to a lawyer, and the part where she said, it's your word against mine, but I have records from the therapist. The judge listened carefully. Then he asked Chloe, Mrs. Stonewall, did you claim that your husband threatened you with physical harm? Chloe, in tears, said, Yes, Your Honor. He said if I didn't confess to the affair, he'd kill me. These recordings are taken out of context. I said that because I was scared for my life. The judge looked at her and said, Mrs. Stonewall, on this recording, your voice sounds calm, confident. You don't sound like someone speaking under threat. Moreover, you're threatening your husband with a protective order. I'm not issuing a ruling yet, but I will be scrutinizing all the evidence very carefully. That was Chloe's first loss. The judge didn't take her word for it. But that was just the warm-up. The main hearings for asset division were scheduled 3 months later. During that time, several more things happened that turned everything upside down. First, Liam, upon finding out that Gus was digging into him, got scared. He started distancing himself from Chloe. Chloe came home, the house where I no longer lived, but she was still there, and had a screaming phone fight. I found out from a neighbor who was on my side. She couldn't stand Chloe because she played loud music at night. The neighbor said, "Jake, your wife was screaming so loud last night my walls shook. She was yelling, 'You can't leave me, I destroyed my marriage for you.'" I realized Liam was bailing. And he started playing both sides. He called me. Yes, imagine that. Liam called me and said, "Jake, buddy, we need to talk. Chloe is unstable. She's blackmailing me, threatening to tell the company about our relationship if I don't help her in court. I don't want to lose my job. Let's make a deal. I'll testify that she seduced me, that there were no threats from you. I'll even say she asked me to fabricate evidence of your threats." I asked, "What do you want in return?" Liam said, "That you won't use the info about my firing from my previous company. And that you won't drag Vanessa into this. I want to start fresh." I said, "Liam, you're a sick bastard. I'm not promising you anything. But if you testified truthfully under oath, I won't actively pursue getting you fired. But if you lie, I'll destroy your career." He agreed. That was a betrayal of Chloe by her own lover. But I didn't fully trust Liam. So I asked Gus to keep watching. Second, I found one more critical thing. While going through old documents, I was still a co-owner of the house, so I had the right to come get my things with a sheriff present, which I did. I found a box in the garage. Inside were bank statements from the last 2 years. Chloe had forgotten to throw them out. There, I saw she'd been paying for a subscription to a dating site. Not Tinder, but a more exclusive one for professionals. And the subscription was started 6 months before Liam joined the company. She was looking for options before Liam. I made copies and gave them to Susan. Now I had a timeline. Chloe was looking for adventure, found Liam, started the affair, and when I caught her, she decided not to split assets fairly but to destroy me as a competitor. The next hearing was decisive. In the courtroom were the lawyers, the judge, me, Chloe, Liam, called as a witness on my motion, and Vanessa, via video link. Chloe arrived in a white suit, hair perfect, but with a face that showed she hadn't slept in a week. Liam was in a cheap suit, nervously clicking a pen. The judge started by questioning Chloe. Susan asked, "Susan, Mrs. Stonewall, you claim your husband systematically subjected you to emotional abuse?" Chloe, "Yes." Susan, "Can you give a specific example?" Chloe, "He controlled my spending, he forbade me from buying work clothes." Susan, "But according to the joint account statements we've submitted, you spent an average of $1,800 per month on clothing and accessories. Your husband spent $200 per month on clothing. Who was controlling whom?" Chloe, That was the illusion of control. He made me feel guilty for every purchase." Susan, "Do you have any records of him making you feel guilty? Texts, emails?" Chloe, "No, it was verbal." Susan, "I see. Now, regarding your relationship with Mr. Morrison. You claim it started after your husband allegedly became emotionally distant?" Chloe, "Yes. I was seeking support." Susan, "Then why did you sign up for a dating site 6 months before Mr. Morrison was hired at your company?" Chloe went pale. She started stammering. That wasn't for dating, it was for networking." Susan, "The site, Elite Singles and Affairs, was for networking?" The judge looked at Chloe. She was silent. Next, Liam was called. I watched him. He was as pale as a sheet. Susan asked, "Mr. Morrison, did you have a romantic relationship with Mrs. Stonewall?" Liam, "Yes." Susan, "When did it start?" Liam, "About 3 months before Mr. Stonewall found out." Susan, "Did Mrs. Stonewall claim that her husband was abusive toward her before Mr. Stonewall caught you together?" Liam, "No. She said he was a good husband, but boring. She said she wanted a divorce but didn't want to lose half the house. She said if he found out about the affair, she'd make up a story about abuse to win in court. I heard her discuss this with her lawyer, David." Chloe's lawyer jumped up. Objection. Hearsay. Judge. Mr. Davis, the witness is testifying to facts he personally heard. Objection overruled. Continue. Liam. She said if she pretended to be scared of her husband, the court would give her the house, she could sell it, buy something smaller, and keep the difference. She said she didn't want to work anymore, that she was tired, and that alimony from her husband would let her take it easy. Silence in the courtroom. Chloe sat with her mouth open. Her lawyer was furiously writing something. Then came Vanessa. Via video link, she told how Liam had destroyed her marriage, then conned her out of money for a joint business that turned out to be fake. She said Liam targeted high-earning women. The judge asked how this was relevant. Susan said, "Your Honor, this shows Mr. Morrison's modus operandi, who, by entering a relationship with Mrs. Stonewall, encouraged her to take actions aimed at removing joint assets from Mr. Stonewall's control, namely, misusing funds to rent an apartment and attempting to make false accusations." The judge nodded. After that hearing, Judge Morrison issued a preliminary ruling. He said, "The court finds no basis to believe Mrs. Stonewall's claims of domestic abuse. On the contrary, the court finds that Mrs. Stonewall's actions were intended to conceal her adultery and to gain an unfair advantage in the divorce proceedings. All assets, including the house, are to be divided equally. However, due to the misappropriation of marital funds, $15,000, used to support an extramarital affair, that amount shall be deducted from Mrs. Stonewall's share. Additionally, the court orders Mrs. Stonewall to reimburse Mr. Stonewall for the legal costs incurred in defending against these false accusations." Chloe sat motionless. Her lawyer whispered something in her ear. I looked at her and felt nothing but exhaustion. But that wasn't all. The most interesting thing happened a month after the divorce was finalized. The house sold. I got my half plus the compensation for the misused funds. Chloe got slightly less than half, barely enough to pay off the credit card debt she'd racked up during the divorce. She'd hired a pricey lawyer and spent money on shopping to support herself. I thought we'd each go our separate ways. But Chloe couldn't stop. She lost her job. It turned out that after Liam testified against her in court, the company conducted an internal investigation. They discovered Chloe had used a corporate card to pay for those Dallas trips that weren't business-related. She was fired for fraud. Liam was fired too. But Liam, I gathered, quickly found another job. I guess not everyone checks references. Chloe, however, was on the job market with a termination for cause and a reputation she'd created for herself. She started texting me. First, angry. "You ruined my life, I hope you rot." Then pitiful. "Jake, I've lost everything. I can't pay rent, help me, we were a family." I didn't respond. I changed my number. But she found me through social media. She created fake accounts and messaged my friends, spreading old gossip about me hitting her. But by then, all our mutual friends knew the truth. Many of them had been at the hearings. I allowed them to come. They'd seen Liam testify, they'd seen the judge not believe Chloe. Most friends turned their backs on her. The biggest revenge didn't come from me. It came from her own family. Chloe has an older sister, Madison. We'd always had a good relationship. Madison is the complete opposite of Chloe, modest, an elementary school teacher, married to a farmer. During the divorce, Madison stayed neutral, but when she found out Chloe tried to accuse me of abuse, she was furious. It turned out that when they were kids, their father was an abuser. He drank and beat their mother. Madison remembers it. She told Chloe, "How dare you use our pain to try to steal a house from a man who never laid a hand on you? You've disgraced Mom's memory." Chloe told Madison she was always jealous of her and that Madison was just a bitter old maid. That was the last straw. Madison completely cut ties with her sister and took my side. She even came over with a pie when I was moving into my new apartment and said, "Jake, I'm sorry for her. You were the best thing that ever happened to her." She blew it. But the story didn't end there. 8 months after the divorce, I found out Chloe had sued Liam. Yes, her lover. She accused him of malicious interference with a marriage, a real legal term in some states, though rarely used in Texas. She demanded compensation from him for the loss of spousal support. I found out when I received a subpoena as a witness. I was called to testify in Chloe versus Liam. I almost laughed. These two, who had tried to destroy me, were now suing each other. I went to court out of pure curiosity. It was a lower civil court. Chloe looked terrible. She'd gained weight, her hair was dull, she wore no makeup and a cheap suit. Liam showed up with a lawyer. Chloe represented herself because she couldn't afford an attorney. She tried to prove that Liam had promised to marry her, that he manipulated her, that he made her cheat on her husband and then abandoned her. Liam responded that she was the instigator, that she'd pursued him, and that she'd tried to blackmail him with his job. The judge in that case looked at the whole situation and said, "Miss Chloe, you were married. You made the decision to break your marital vows. No one can force an adult to cheat. The motion is denied." Chloe ran out of the courtroom in tears. I sat on the bench and felt emptiness. Not satisfaction, just emptiness. After that, I lost track of her completely. I moved to a different area, changed jobs, I started my own small construction firm with a partner. I started seeing a therapist because all of this left a mark. I couldn't trust women. I thought every smile was manipulation. The therapist helped me separate the past from the present. And now, almost 2 years later, I'm sitting on the porch. Next to me, sleeping, is a girl. Her name is Sophie. We've been together for 6 months. She's a landscape designer. She didn't know this whole story at first, but eventually I told her. She listened, hugged me, and said, "Thank you for telling me. And thank you for not becoming like them. We don't have passwords on our phones." She leaves her phone on the table when she showers. I don't check, not because I'm afraid, but because I've learned to trust again. As for Chloe, the last I heard from Madison, she moved to Florida, is living with some older guy, and works at a cosmetics store. Madison said, she looks older than her years. She's still angry at the world. But she's not your problem anymore. Liam, according to rumors, married some heiress in Connecticut. I almost envy him. He found a new victim, but that's not my concern. I'm often asked, "Jake, do you feel like you got revenge?" I don't know. I wasn't planning revenge. I was just defending myself. If there was revenge, it came on its own. Chloe lost everything because she overestimated her abilities and underestimated my resolve. And Liam, who tried to play the knight, ended up betraying her when it suited him. That's perfect karma, but it wasn't my goal. My goal was to keep my house, my money, and my reputation. If you're going through infidelity and divorce right now, here's what I'd tell you based on my experience. Go to a lawyer immediately. Don't try to negotiate on your own. The moment you talk about divorce, you're no longer husband and wife. You're opponents in a legal battle. Gather evidence. Record conversations if it's legal. Save receipts, bank statements. Emotions fade, but facts remain. Don't believe promises. When a cheater says, "I'll quit, I'll never do it again," it's often just a ploy to buy time to hide assets or come up with a new strategy. Keep your friends close. Without Marcus, who came over that night, I might have done something stupid. Without Madison, who confirmed there was no abuse in our family, the social pressure would have been much worse. Don't be afraid of court. Many people are afraid the court always sides with the woman. That's not true. Judges, especially in Texas, have seen hundreds of false accusations. If you have evidence, the court will be fair. Tomorrow, Sophie and I are going to pick out furniture for the living room. There are joys in this new life. Update. A lot of people are asking about the dog. Yes, Sophie and I have a dog, a golden retriever named Murphy. He sleeps at the foot of the bed. He's a good boy. Chloe didn't like dogs, said they shed. That was another red flag I ignored. Now I have Murphy, and he licks my face every morning. That's the best thing that came out of this divorce. Update 2. For those saying the story sounds too perfect. It wasn't perfect. I lost 10 years of my life with someone I loved. I had nightmares. I'd wake up in a cold sweat thinking she was lying to the judge again. I spent about $30,000 on lawyers and a pie. I lost friends who believed her. I lost the house we built together. Yes, I came out ahead financially and legally, but the scars remain. So this isn't a fairy tale with a happy ending. It's a story about how not to let yourself be destroyed. Update 3. No, I don't regret not punching Liam in the face at the hotel. I know if I had, she'd have called the cops, and I'd have been the aggressor. Self-control was the only thing that saved me. Keep it together, guys. Alright, good night, everyone.